The story begins with an average salaryman who plays his favorite video game, but as he leaves his apartment, he suddenly suffers a heart attack and he ends up dying. He wakes up in a strange room where he's surprised to see a flying dog, and he realizes that he's been reincarnated into another world as a boy named Ars Luvent. He starts studying at a young age, realizing that he's living in the Summer Fourth Continent, which used to be divided into 7 kingdoms. But the kingdom of Ansel united the land and established the Summer Fourth Empire. He learns about the existence of magic in that world and realizes that he's a member of a noble family which rules a small region called Lamberg. He's happy that he has everything he needs because the servants are looking after him, and he visits the barracks where he watches the soldiers as they train. He sees a soldier named Melis struggling, so he uses his unique appraisal ability, which allows him to see Melis's stats. He learns that Melis has no talent with the spear, but he has potential as an archer, so Ars advises him to use a bow, but he refuses, saying only cowards fight from a distance, but Ars insists, so the soldiers tell him to give it a try. He reveals that he has never used a bow before, but Ars tells him to go for it, and he ends up hitting the target in his first attempt. The soldiers can't believe this, thinking he just got lucky, so they tell him to try again, but he keeps hitting the target with incredible precision. So they recognize his skills, thinking he will become an excellent archer, and they wonder how Ars learned about his talent. But Ars doesn't want to tell anyone about his ability, thinking they won't believe him because he's the only one who can use it, so he tells them it was just his instinct. He starts thinking about his ability as he looks at the mirror, trying to check his own stats, but he realizes that he can't, so he concludes that it only works on other people. While having dinner with his family, his father Raven is impressed that he was able to discover Melissa's talent. We learn that Raven used to be a commoner, but he rose to power because of his amazing combat skills, and Ars checks his stats, realizing that he's the greatest warrior in the land. He tells Ars to focus on his instincts, thinking it's going to be useful when he becomes the ruler, and he realizes that he needs to prepare for his future. So Ars starts studying about the Empire, but he realizes that the future is going to be chaotic because the rulers are corrupt and the peasants are revolting. He's afraid that the Empire is on the brink of war, so he needs to learn how to lead his forces in battle, but he knows that he lacks combat skills, so he isn't sure if he can protect his people. He thinks his ability might be able to help him, so he walks around the village, trying to look for the perfect soldier. But he realizes that everyone lacks talent, and he becomes exhausted because his ability strains his eyes. He suddenly sees a boy named Reitz as he gets kicked out of a shop, and everyone looks down on him because he's from an inferior race called the Mawkins. Ars gives him food, and he starts eating as Ars checks his stats, and he's completely stunned because it's absolutely insane. Reitz is about to leave, but Ars follows him, inviting him to become his retainer because Ars wants to gather the cream of the crop so that he can strengthen his army. Reitz doesn't believe him, thinking he wants to play a game, but he explains that he's a noble, showing Reitz the Luvent family crest and telling him that he has immense potential. But he thinks he's going to cause trouble for Ars because everyone hates Mawkins, so he declines and he starts walking away. But Ars refuses to give up, telling Reitz that he can eat as much as he wants if he becomes a retainer, so he ends up changing his mind. They enter the Luvent mansion, where the servants give Ars his food, but they give Reitz a simple meal, thinking that's all he deserves. So Ars realizes that they hate Mawkins, thinking he can't talk them out of it, so he sits beside Reitz and shares his food with him. The servants are shocked by this behavior, but Ars tells them that Reitz is his honored guest, so they start treating him well, and Ars asks him what he was doing in the village. So he reveals that he used to work as a mercenary, but his companions died in battle, so he started wandering alone, and he ended up in the village. He explains that he tried to join the other mercenaries, but they shunned him because he was just a child, so they thought he wasn't a capable fighter. One of the servants interrupts them, saying it's time for Reitz to leave, but Ars explains that Reitz is going to become his retainer, so the servant absolutely loses it. Raven learns about this, so he calls Ars, telling him that a Malkin wouldn't make a good retainer, but he explains that Reitz has incredible potential, saying it would be a waste to let him go. But Raven doesn't believe this, reminding Ars that Machans are inferior beings, but he explains that he believes in Ritz's talent, telling Raven to test his abilities. Raven recalls that he was able to discover Melissa's talent, so he decides to give Ritz a chance, promising to hire him as a soldier if he passes the test. Ars is happy to hear this, but Raven explains that Ritz will have a mock duel with him, so Ars becomes nervous, telling him that Ritz is only 14, so he still hasn't reached his full potential. Ars checks their stats, and he realizes that it's not even close, but his father explains he will go easy on him, so Ars thinks he might stand a chance. They make their way to the barracks, but Ritz wonders why Ars wants him as a retainer, because he's being persecuted wherever he goes. But Ars explains that he needs Ritz's help, saying he's going to become the lord of the land, so he needs someone capable of leading his army. They reach the barracks, where Raven prepares to fight, ordering Ritz to take a sword, and he explains that Ritz will win if he manages to land a blow before the timer runs out. Raven charges in, and Ritz struggles to defend himself, as Raven continues to pressure him. Ars thinks he's in trouble, but the soldiers are impressed, because he's able to keep up with Raven, who has a reputation for crushing soldiers in an instant. He manages to land a hit, knocking Ritz down, and Raven tells him he's running out of time, but he refuses to give up, realizing that Ars is counting on him, so he decides to fight seriously. He charges at Raven, who tries to stop him, but the light blinds him, and he barely manages to block Ritz's attack. Everyone can't believe this, and Raven admits that he lost, because the attack grazed him, so he decides to hire Ritz as a soldier. Ars thanks his father for giving Ritz a chance, and Raven admits that he has talent, thinking he will become a great swordsman. Raven reveals that he was worried about his son's future, but he believes Ars is going to become a great man, because he has the power to recognize people's talents, and the soldiers praise Ritz, realizing he's an excellent fighter. After some time, we see Ritz wearing his uniform, as he accompanies Ars, who wonders why he's taking on servant duties, so he explains that he wants to help as much as he can. He reveals that he always dreamed of serving a lord, knowing he would have died if Ars didn't take him in, so he wants to spend the rest of his life serving him. After a few months, Ritz has been accepted by everyone, and he even receives tutoring, which further increases his ingenuity stat, making him one of the most knowledgeable people in the house. He gives Ars a lesson about the Summerforth Empire, mentioning how the Ansel Kingdom was able to conquer the other 6 kingdoms over 200 years ago, but the empire is now in a dire situation, because the current ruler Bydris is just a child, and his power is held by his retainers, who are involved in factional rivalries, causing the central authority to be corroded, leading to more revolts, and governors that defy the crown. Ars thinks that the conflicts will only continue to grow, so he must prepare and gather the most talented people to his side. He wonders where the next conflict might be, and Ritz mentions their province of Missian, because the governor is old and in poor health, so there's a high chance he will die in the next few years. He has 2 sons, but hasn't decided on who will succeed him. They both seem to want the position, so there's likely to be a war. Ars wonders who his father would side with, and Ritz thinks it would be the older brother, since it's his right to succeed. But Ritz also notes that it's not up to Raven to decide, since he doesn't directly serve the governor. We learn that each province is divided up into districts, and Lamberg is part of the Canair district, which is within Missian, so Raven serves the head of Canair. Ars worries about what would happen if his father were on the losing side, but Ritz thinks this is their opportunity, because performing well during a major conflict can help a lord advance in the world, and Ritz thinks they need to recruit more people to get stronger. They head out, and they see Raven, as Ars notes he has been spending more time training, so he also knows that war is coming. Ars mentions they are headed to the town to find more recruits, and his father suggests finding someone who has the talent for magic, because magic would be invaluable in the battles to come. We see that Ars once tried to learn magic, but he quickly realized that he had no aptitude for it. They make it to the capital city in Canair, and Ars is amazed to see so many people. Ritz notes that there are around 50 times more people than Lamberg, and the Pyre House rules the district. Ars notices how everyone looks wealthy, wishing the people of Lamberg could also be like this, and Reitz thinks they will be able to find someone with potential since there are so many people. Ars starts looking around with his appraisal, but after some time, there's no one that has caught his eye. They decide to keep looking, but Ars notices an alley where all the homeless are gathered. Ars wants to help them, but Reitz thinks there's nothing they can do in their current position. Ars thinks about how he thought the town was amazing, but thinks he wants to create a place where even those who are less fortunate can make a life for themselves, and Reitz is glad to be serving him. They reach the market, and Ars is amazed looking at all the different foods. A man offers to sell him a dragon egg, and Ars immediately imagines having a dragon as a pet. He decides to buy 3 of them, but Reitz suddenly points his blade at the man, accusing him of being a scammer. The man says he's legit, but Reitz knows that trade with the northern continent was frozen, so it's impossible for him to have dragon eggs. He prepares to end the man for his lies, but Ars holds him back, as the people start to stare at them. Reitz apologizes for his outburst, but Ars thanks him for looking out for him. They have a break for lunch, and Ars notices a candy stall, so he rushes over to try it, but he suddenly gets bumped into, and he realizes he was robbed. Reitz goes after them, and he manages to grab their cloak, revealing them to be a girl. She turns a corner, but she's surrounded by some thugs who start beating her. Ars tells them to stop, and one of the men attack him, but Reitz stops him, taking him out with a single punch. He easily deals with the other 2 men, and they all stumble away, saying it's not over. Ars checks on the girl, but he's amazed when he sees her stats. He learns her name is Charlotte, and he sees that she has S-tier aptitude for magic, as well as insanely high stats for leadership and prowess. Reitz asks for Ars's coin pouch back, but Ars suddenly asks her to be his retainer. Reitz thinks she's just a thief, but Ars mentions her talent for magic, and Charlotte refuses to serve a child like him, saying she has never even used magic before. Ars becomes desperate to convince her, thinking she's stealing because she has a hard life, so he mentions how he will give her food and a salary, but she just thinks he's a spoiled rich noble. She thinks he doesn't deserve his privilege, thinking he was just lucky to be born a noble. She refuses to become a tool for him, but Ars swears he's different, mentioning how he wants to someday create a place where everyone has an opportunity, but Charlotte mentions how they can't wait for someday to come, because every day is a struggle for them. Reitz understands her, but still demands for her to return the coin pouch. Charlotte gives it back since they saved her, and Ars asks her about the men, so she explains they were the men of a slave trader. She was caught stealing from a noble, so she was sold off as a slave. She managed to escape from the slave trader, but they then sent the men after her. Ars wonders why she stayed in the town after escaping, but we see a bunch of children that rush up to her, and she explains how she couldn't just leave them behind. Ars agrees not to recruit her, but he decides to give her his money anyway. At night, Ars continues to think about her, and Reitz notes how he was in a similar situation as her, so he understands how she feels. He thinks she must have been treated terribly by nobles in the past, and she must see everyone as an enemy, but he tells Ars he's different. He thinks about the flaw behind his plan to create a better place, but at that moment, they hear the kids from earlier calling for Charlotte. Ars rushes down and asks them what's going on, so they tell him that Charlotte was taken. We learn that Charlotte can't remember when she last cried, and she lived a miserable life because her parents abandoned her. So she had no choice but to steal from others, wondering why she was even born into this world. The men take Charlotte to their boss, and they beat her up, wondering why she isn't crying, but their boss Albert reminds them not to ruin her appearance because she's already been sold. They take her money away, and she tries to resist, but one of the men stops her. She thinks about the children, knowing they need the money to survive, but Albert thinks her life is worthless, so he tells her to accept her fate. But Reitz suddenly arrives, and he attacks the men, knocking them down. Ars approaches Charlotte, and Albert recognizes him as a noble, asking him if he needs anything. So he tells him to release her, but he refuses, saying she's his merchandise, and she tells Ars to mind his own business. But he tells her he's worried about her, because her eyes always looked empty, and he notes that she lacks ambition despite her exceptional talent. Albert has no idea what he's talking about, So he explains that she has given up on her future because she has lost hope, but Albert laughs, reminding him that she's just a slave. So he becomes upset, telling Albert that he's robbing her of her future, and he mentions that she should be able to decide what she wants to become. We learn that Charlotte decided to close her heart, and she never cried, because she thought it was a sign of weakness, knowing she needed to do what was necessary to survive. But she suddenly starts crying, and Albert has had enough, so he tells his men to get rid of Ars. One of them threatens to beat him up, but Reitz stops him, telling them they deserve to die, because they made his master angry. They try to take him down, but he easily defeats them, so their mages cast a spell, trying to burn him alive, but it doesn't work, and he gives them a beating. He thinks they're pathetic, but Albert calls his right-hand man, revealing that he used to be the captain of an army, but he got kicked out because of his poor behavior. So Charlotte is worried, but Ars checks his stats, realizing he's nothing special, and he tries to attack Reitz, but he realizes he's no match for him, and he ends up getting knocked out. Albert can't believe it, and he wonders what he did to deserve this, reminding Ars that slave trading is legal in the city. So Ars offers to pay him, saying he will buy Charlotte, but Albert refuses, because he already has a buyer. But Reitz advises Albert to value his credibility, knowing his business will suffer if the people find out his slave has been taken away. So Reitz suggests telling the buyer that someone else bought Charlotte for a higher price, threatening to kill him if he refuses to obey. So he decides to let them have her. They're about to leave the city, but Charlotte explains there's somewhere she wants to go, and she leads them to her secret place, which gives them a beautiful view of the city. She explains that she goes there to clear her mind, and she asks Ars why he wants to create a peaceful city for people like her. So he tells her it's because he likes kids, so she finds him weird, reminding him that he's also a kid. But he recalls his past life, and we learn that he was always exhausted because of his duties, but the smiles of children always brightened up his day. So he believes that they give people hope, thinking they're inspiring everyone to work towards a brighter future. So he wants to give them a place to enjoy their lives, thinking it's his duty as a ruler, and she likes his answer, so she decides to join him, saying she wants the children to be happy. Reitz decides to test her, so he gives her a magical pendant, telling her to cast a spell while wearing it, but she explains that she has never used magic before. So he teaches her how to cast a basic spell, and she follows his instructions, allowing her to create a fireball, which causes a massive explosion. Everyone sees it, and they're amazed by its destructive power, as the pendant shatters after she has consumed all of its energy. Ars and Reitz can't believe how powerful she is, thinking she's amazing. She asks Ars if he's going to give her food and shelter, so he confirms this, saying he will even give her a salary. So she asks him if he can give her salary to the children in the city, because she wants to help them survive, and he promises to do this, so she decides to serve him to the best of her abilities. She says goodbye to the children, and they start crying, as Ars notes that he was able to recruit talented vassals, thinking they will serve as valuable assets to his family. But he wonders if he'll be able to fulfill his duties, because everyone has high expectations for him, but he's determined to achieve his goal. They start traveling, but they see Charlotte eating like a pig, so Reitz thinks they need to teach her basic manners, because she'll be joining Ars during his gatherings. But she isn't interested in learning it, thinking it's a waste of time. They reach the mansion, but Raven refuses to let Charlotte join the army, thinking she's worthless. But Ars tells her to display her powers, so she casts a spell, and Raven can't believe how powerful she is, so he agrees to let her join. 3 years later, we see Raven's army returning from battle, and we learn about their territorial dispute with the Duchy of Sayetz, which forced Raven to serve in the military. Ars asks him about the battle, so he explains that they crushed the enemy, saying Charlotte's magic led them to victory. We learn that she's now recognized as the strongest mage on the battlefield, and she leads the magic unit, which is an indispensable part of the army. We see that Ars has newborn siblings, and they both have remarkable talents, so he thinks they will be able to support the family in the future. Reitz tells him about the Kiska brothers, saying they're from a hunter family that just moved into Lamberg, and they appear to be talented. So Ars decides to look for them, and Charlotte volunteers to go with him. They search around the woods, and they see a creature running away, but an arrow takes it out in one shot, and a pair of hunters arrive. Ars uses his ability, realizing they're the Kiska brothers, Gaius and Marcus, and he recognizes their talents, thinking they will make competent soldiers. They invite him to their house, where their father Greg prepares a feast for them. Charlotte tastes the food, saying it's delicious, and Gaius explains that it's the creature they just hunted, which is called a suwu. Greg asks Ars what he's doing in the woods, so he explains that he wants to invite Gaius and Marcus to join the army, because he knows they're talented, and Greg is overjoyed to hear this. He tells Ars that he has another son named Rizal, but he isn't as capable as his brothers, and they see him taking bread from the table, so Greg scolds him, telling him to greet their guests. Ars uses his skill on Rizal, realizing he's a genius because his intellect is off the charts. So Ars tells Greg that he wants to make Rizal his vassal, but Greg thinks it's a bad idea, saying he will just cause trouble. But Ars asks him if he wants to join them, and he becomes frightened, thinking he needs to go to the battlefield, so he refuses, telling Ars that he doesn't want to die. He returns to his room, and Greg tells Ars that he's been locking himself in his room ever since his mother died, so he doesn't have any life skills. But Ars explains that he's a genius, thinking he will make an excellent tactician in the future. Ars enters Rizal's room, realizing he's reading a book, but he explains that it's the only one they have in the house, and his mother used to read it to him. He explains that the book gives him peace of mind, so Ars invites him to his library, saying he can read as much as he wants. He initially refuses, because he doesn't trust Ars, but he wants to read more books, so he decides to go, but he says he'll bring his brothers with him. They head to the mansion, where Ars introduces Charlotte to Gaius and Marcus, and she shows them around the barracks, as Rizal enters the library, where Ars tells him to read the books that interest him. Ars orders Reitz to take care of him, saying he also needs to study, so he leaves the library. But he ends up falling asleep, and he realizes that he left Rizal in the library for hours, thinking he must have left already. So he returns to the library, where Reitz tells him that Rizal fell asleep after reading countless books. Ars uses his skill, realizing that Rizal's intellect is increasing, so he notes that Rizal is able to learn extremely fast. His brothers join them, thinking he just wasted time in the library because he was never taught how to read, and Ars is surprised to hear this. Rizal wakes up, and Ars asks him how he's able to read books, so he explains that he was able to learn it just by observing his mother, and everyone finds this difficult to believe. The next day, Ars visits the brothers, telling them to use traps to catch the suwu. Rizal explains that he read about traps, so Ars tells him to use his knowledge to capture them, and his brothers support him, so he decides to give it a try. After some time, Greg sees Rizal's invention, realizing that it was able to capture multiple suwu. He explains that he's worried about their father, because his brothers will become soldiers, so Greg is going to have a hard time hunting for food. So he created the trap, revealing that he painted the fence yellow, so that the suwu will charge in. Greg notices herbs hanging above them, so Rizal explains that young suwu and their mothers dislike the smell of it, so it's meant to keep them away, because he wants the suwu to keep reproducing. His brothers think he's amazing, but Greg tells Rizal to leave the house with his brothers, telling Ars to take care of them. So Rizal thinks his father hates him, but Ars thinks there's a good reason why Greg is behaving this way. That evening, Rizal thinks about his mother, thinking his father hates him because her health declined after she gave birth to him, so he blames himself for her death. But he suddenly hears Greg talking to his brothers, and Gaius wonders why he's treating Rizal so harshly. So he explains that he wants Rizal to hate him, thinking he has failed as a father because he wasn't able to recognize his son's talent. He reveals that he loves Rizal, and he wants him to reach his full potential, but Greg thinks he's getting in the way. So he wants Rizal to forget about him, telling Gaius and Marcus to support their brother. The next day, Ars arrives to take the boys away, so they prepare to leave, and Greg starts chopping wood. But Rizal approaches him, saying he doesn't hate him, and he promises to do his best. He tells his father that he wants to see him again, and Greg is overjoyed to hear this, saying he'll be waiting for them to return. 3 years later, we see Raven has become ill, and Ars thinks he's in no condition to fight, but his father says he has no choice given the state things are in. We learn that the governor has become sick, but he named his younger son Vas as his successor, and the elder brother Kurin insists the document was forged, leading to a dispute. The retainers become split on who should be the successor, so their province of Messian has fallen into chaos, and Sayitz has also been taking advantage of this. Ars wonders if he will need to fight, but his father says there's something more important for him to think about, mentioning his betrothal. Ars is shocked to hear this, and he can't believe he was never told about it. His father gives him a letter, and he rushes to tell the others the news, wondering what he should do about it, but a maid suddenly informs him that his fiancée has arrived. He goes out to meet her, but he doesn't know how to act, because he never even had a girlfriend in his previous life. But the girl introduces herself as Leisha Played, and he is instantly charmed by her, but when he checks her stats, he's shocked to see she has insanely high ambition, thinking it doesn't match her cute appearance. He worries she's putting on an act, and he refuses to let her fool him, but as she talks to him, he finds her too adorable. He decides to show her around, and her butler Jean is surprised to see a Malkin in the house, but Leisha already knows about Reitz, so she instantly tells Jean to apologize. Leisha is given a warm welcome, and they have a meal together. She finds the meat delicious, and Ars tells her about how they use traps to catch the Suwu. He thinks about how great she is, and she mentions how she passed through Lamberg on her way there. Ars thinks it's a shame that it's raining so he can't show her around, but she tells him not to worry as the sun starts to shine. He wonders if she can control the weather, but she reveals she watched the clouds on her way there and could tell it was just a passing rain, so she tells him he can show her the town. Meanwhile, we see Charlotte and Rizal watching them, but they both get a dangerous feeling from her. Ars and Leisha head into the town, but we see two men arguing. Ars wonders what's going on, and a woman tells him it's a dispute over a Magistone order. The shopkeeper ordered flame Magistones, but the dealer brought sound Magistones instead, and since it was just a verbal agreement, it's unclear who's wrong. Ars thinks he should try to resolve things, but worries about failing in front of Leisha. Charlotte appears, and she offers to solve things with force, but Leisha tells her to stop. Charlotte thinks she should mind her own business, but Leisha says she's a fan, and even Charlotte is charmed by her. Leisha decides to handle the situation, and asks Ars to grant her a favor if she succeeds. We see the men fighting, and Leisha approaches them. They wonder who she is, so she introduces herself as Ars's fiancée, and they are happy to hear this, thinking Ars is growing up. She offers to buy the sound Magistone, mentioning they are precious in her territory, and she reveals they have a volcano, so she can also sell the flame Magistone at a good price. But she says it was all Ars's idea. The men are happy he cares about helping them, and he tells them to write up a contract next time to prevent this happening again in the future. The situation is resolved, and Ars thanks Leisha for her help. After that, Leisha mentions her favor, and Ars wonders what she's after, but she just asks him to answer her question, wondering what kind of person he likes. Ars can't believe that's all she wants, but he knows he can't outsmart her, so he tells her he likes people who speak their minds and don't hide things from him. At night, Ars thinks about how he wasn't able to figure out Leisha's intentions, but as he prepares to sleep, he finds her in his bed. He wonders if she's messing with him, but she mentions she wants to have an honest conversation with him. They have some tea, and he wonders what she wanted to talk about. She reveals she has the talent to tell how people feel by looking at them, and she mentions how he was suspicious of her when they first met, so she wants to know why. He decides to tell her the truth, revealing his ability to see a person's stats, and that she has insanely high ambition, which makes him think all her actions are calculated. He thinks she won't believe him, but she thinks it explains his behavior. She admits she's ambitious, so Ars wonders what she's after. She reveals the ambition of a woman is to make a good man fall in love with her, and Ars realizes the best path for her is to marry someone powerful. He thinks she's unlucky since their domain is small, but Leisha knows what he's thinking, saying that even though their territory is small, after spending the day with him, she still wants to marry him, thinking he shows great promise. Ars thinks he just has good people around him, but Leisha thinks that's exactly the reason why he'll be great, mentioning how everyone sees him as their family, thinking it might be the most important ability for a lord. She tells him she has fallen in love with him, but she decides to call it a night, and Ars is left stunned. He freaks out over not responding, but we see Leisha outside also feeling embarrassed, but she thinks about how it's the first time she has told someone how she really feels. We see Leisha leaving, and she notes how he still hasn't responded to her declaration. This makes him panic, but she tells him she can wait, but she has decided she will marry him. In a flashback, we learn that she hates the world of nobility, because everyone lies and backstabs just trying to secure their own positions. She hated her ability because of this, but one day, when she saw a girl getting married, she realized she could escape the world of plotting and scheming if she found a man who was strong enough. So she had no intention of marrying into Ars's house, thinking she needed to find someone stronger, but after spending time with him, she realized how kind and how loved he is, wanting to be a part of his world. So she's grateful to God for giving her power, and decides to help Ars with building his new world. We see Ars writing to her, telling her how his father is getting better, and that the conflict around the succession has calmed down, but he hopes to see her again soon, so he can tell her how he feels, thinking he also wants to marry her. 2 years later, we see Ars talking to the doctor about his father, but the doctor reveals that Raven's condition is getting worse, so he should prepare for the worst. Meanwhile in Arkantes, an assassin invades the castle, and he murders the Duke of Missian. So the soldiers surround him, but he jumps out the window, and ends up dying. Raven tells Ars about the assassination, and he realizes that the succession dispute will reach its peak. So each district chief will need to choose between the two brothers, and he thinks the Canare district chief will choose the older brother. So they will need to follow him, telling Reitz to prepare the troops to act at any moment. He tries to get up, but he suddenly falls back onto the bed, because the pain is unbearable. Days later, Ars receives summons from the Canare district chief, and Reitz asks to go with Charlotte in his father's place, but Ars refuses, and decides that he needs to go. On the other hand, Leisha is worried, and she wonders why she hasn't received a response from Ars. The trio arrives in the Canare district, and Ars approaches the castle gate guard, showing the invitation letter, and explaining that they're representing the Leuven house. The guard realizes that the invitation is genuine, but he wonders if Raven would send a child. Charlotte wonders if he thinks they're lying, and the guard recognizes her as Leuven's Princess of the Flames, and Reitz as the Reaper, but Ars wonders why they have such nicknames. Reitz thinks the name doesn't suit him, as it makes him seem like a threat to everyone, but they think he's actually a dangerous person. The guard guides them through the castle, and they're greeted by a man named Renard, the right hand of the Canare chief. Ars checks his stats, and he realizes that everything is balanced, so he's a jack of all trades. He has heard about Reitz and Charlotte, so he tries to recruit them, but they explain that they're loyal to the Leuven house. He thinks it's a shame, but acknowledges that Leuven must be a great place, so Ars thanks him. He takes them to the meeting room with the other leaders, and Ars introduces himself as the son of Raven Leuven. But the other leaders don't respond, so he feels the pressure of the room and decides to sit down. He realizes that the old man is Orsulo, the Lord of Kumir, and he used to play with him when he was little. Orsulo thinks he has grown a lot, and even offers cookies to Ars, but the other lord doesn't seem to like him. The doors suddenly open, and everyone stands up to greet the Canare chief, who introduces himself as Lumiere Pyres, and he thanks everyone for their presence. Ars uses his ability on him, and sees his stats match those of a territory chief, with high prowess and well-balanced stats. He also realizes how Renard compensates for Lumiere's weaknesses, so they're perfect together to manage the territory. Lumiere confirms that the governor's assassination will cause a succession war, so he has decided to support the older son Kurin, as Ars notes that his father was right. Lumiere asks if there are any objections, but everyone agrees with him, so he asks them to prepare the troops for war, and ends the meeting. Lumiere goes to talk to Ars, and wishes his father well, commenting that the Leuven house is proving to be very strong despite being small. He congratulates Ars for representing Raven and admits he has high expectations for them. The Lord who was staring at Ars calls him, and he introduces himself as aniplot from the Torquista territory. So Ars becomes worried, realizing that he's Leisha's father, and he reveals that she seems upset with Ars lately, so he wonders what he did wrong. Hammond wonders if he has been responding to his daughter's letters, and he realizes that he hasn't replied to her because the Duke was assassinated and his father got worse, so he didn't have time. Hammond knows that she likes him, revealing that she doesn't usually show her emotions, but lately she has been expressing herself. He confesses that he prioritized his work as a lord and didn't pay much attention to her when she was younger, so she always felt lonely. He wants her to be happy, and he was angry at Ars for not replying, but he realizes that part of it is his own fault, so he apologizes to him and asks him to take care of his daughter. Ars promises to make her happy, and he's glad to hear this, as Ars realizes that he really cares about his daughter. Ars returns home and gives the news to his father, who mentions that he went without telling him. Ars thinks he's angry, but he praises him and thinks he did an amazing job. He later decides to write to Leisha and apologizes for not responding to her, revealing that he also met her father and hopes that their families will work together during the war. He also remembers his promise to Hammond and decides to win the war to protect Leisha. The next morning, Ars trains with Reitz, who is worried about him because he's been training all day, but he refuses to stop. He notices that everyone is getting stronger and is disappointed that he hasn't improved yet. He remembers when he led his troops in simulated battles, and it was a disaster, realizing that he has no real battle experience and is always afraid. He knows that Reitz and Charlotte are strong, but it would be useless if the leader is weak. Rizal arrives and tells him that Sayitz is preparing to attack, so Lumiere sent an order for them to join the fight. Sayitz is invading Mission by attacking Orsilo's territory, and if it gets conquered, then they'll be next. Ars knows his father can't go to battle, so he realizes that he must be the one to go. He trembles at the idea, but orders everyone to prepare the troops, and Reitz promises to help him win his first battle. The troops are gathered, and Ars begins his speech, but Raven suddenly appears, and he refuses to let Ars go to battle. Ars mentions that he's in terrible condition, but he doesn't mind dying for Lamberg. Reitz tries to intervene, but Raven tells him to stay out of it. Ars explains that he'll win because he has Reitz and Charlotte by his side, but Raven comments that he doesn't have the face of a warrior. Ars wonders what he means, so Raven orders a soldier to bring the prisoner for execution. Raven reveals that the man committed heinous crimes, but he got sick, so he couldn't execute him. He promises to recognize Ars as a warrior if he remains calm as he watches the man die. They bring the axe, but Ars wonders how to stay calm if he has never seen someone get executed. The prisoner declares that he has killed countless people, and he feels amazing when he kills children. Raven gives the order to execute him, so Ars tries to stay calm, but he absolutely loses it. Raven declares that he can't lead the troops, so he'll lead them himself, as Ars realizes that he isn't ready for war. On the battlefield, Raven leads his men and takes down several enemies as Reitz fights by his side. Rizal stays safe, ordering their formations as the archers finish off the enemy infantry, and Charlotte uses her magic to break into the fortress. Raven and Reitz continue breaking the enemy formation to keep advancing, and they're able to take the enemy fort after a month, despite being outnumbered. Raven and his men return to Lamberg after Ars's 12th birthday, and his wife helps him rest, but the twins are worried about him. Ars appears to greet the group, and they realize he's injured, but he explains that it was because of his training. He asks about his father, so Reitz explains that Raven led them to victory, but it took a toll on his body. Ars blames himself for forcing his father to go to battle, so they remind him that Raven was already sick, but he thanks them for their kindness and leaves to continue his training. But they realize it's getting late, and Charlotte reveals that she heard how Ars kept training while they were in battle. They hope he doesn't get sick, as Leisha comes to visit, but she's worried about Ars, because the tone in his letters changed since the conflict began. She asks if he's okay, as Charlotte and Rizal think Reitz should tell her, So he tells her that Ars is suffering because he can't fight and blames himself for his father's condition. Leisha feels ashamed for not having done anything, so she goes to the training room and opens the door. She sees Ars being knocked down as a soldier asks him to continue the next day. But he remembers that his father was fighting despite being sick, so he gets up and continues training as Leisha decides to leave. Reitz questions if she won't talk to him, but she thinks it's not the right time for that. A maid suddenly announces that Raven has woken up, and she explains that he asked to talk to them. Raven thanks them for coming and apologizes for worrying them, so Charlotte wonders what's gotten into him. He explains that he's not speaking as their lord, and asks what they think of their lives. So they tell him that Lamberg feels like their true home, and Raven is happy to hear this, but he confesses that he's going to die soon. They ask him not to speak like that, but he can tell that he doesn't have much time, and remembers not knowing what to do when Ars brought them. He remembers how Reitz was a Malkin, Charlotte was a thief, and Rizal was a child when they arrived, and he's proud that they're now the pillars of the house. He comments that Ars isn't strong enough for war, and regrets not taking him to the battlefield when he was healthy, or teaching him about the harsh realities of the world. Raven realizes it's too late for him, so he asks a favor and begs them to help Ars, explaining that he's asking them as a father. Rizal explains that he'd continue to blame himself if it weren't for Ars, and promises to study more to help him. Charlotte promises to serve Ars because he gave her life meaning, and she wants to experience the world he'll build, as Reitz promises to fight against anyone who stands in his way. They thank Raven for accepting them, and Reitz mentions that he also has a request to make. He opens the door, telling Leisha that Raven wants to talk to her, so she enters, as the other three leave the room. She introduces herself to Raven, who apologizes for seeing him in such a sad state, and asks if she remembers when they first met. She's surprised because she doesn't remember, so he confesses that he was the one who asked for her engagement to Ars. He saw her at a funeral and thought she was wise despite her age, noticing that she's kind, and wanted someone like her by Ars's side. She's shocked to hear this, and Raven asks her to stay with Ars, despite their house being small, but she interrupts him and mentions that Ars is doing his best to surpass him. So Raven realizes she's in love with Ars, and is relieved that he's in good hands. She leaves, and informs everyone that Raven wants to talk to Ars, so they go to the training room, and Leisha thanks Reitz for his kindness. Reitz remembers his time with Raven, and is frustrated by how cruel the world is. Ars goes to talk to his father, and is happy that he has regained consciousness. Ars reveals that he looked into Raven's illness while he was away, and found medicine that could help him recover. Ars tells him about a doctor in the province, but Raven ignores him and comments on how much he has grown. So he becomes emotional, and Raven reveals that he was his age when he decided to become a warrior. He was born in a remote village in Missian, which was governed by a tyrant who extorted the people. So one day, he couldn't stand it anymore and ran away from home to live in the city. The governor of Missian was visiting the city when he arrived, and he remembers his greatness. So he decided to become a man capable of being a governor and leading soldiers into battle. So he studied the art of the sword and fought with all his heart, which made him stand out, and he was appointed the head of a domain. He apologizes for giving him the burden of being his son, but Ars is happy to have him as his father. Raven asks him about Leisha and warns that she's fierce, thinking she takes after her mother more than Hammond. Ars wonders if he's close to Hammond, so Raven talks about stories from his youth, and the two spend the entire night talking. But the next morning, Raven passes away. They hold his funeral, and Ars comforts his siblings, as they say their goodbyes. He confesses to the citizens of Lamberg, saying he's not as strong as his father, but he asks for their help, so that he can protect everyone. This moves the people, so they promise to give their support, encouraging him to do his best, and the others remember their moments with Raven. Ars is grateful to everyone for the encouragement, and prays that his father continues to watch over them from above. He announces himself as the leader of the Leuven house, and everyone bows in respect. Meanwhile, we see a mysterious woman, as she hears men talking about the Duke's assassination, and she asks them to tell her more about it. 3 months pass after Raven's death, and Ars goes to his father's grave, telling him he's still getting used to his responsibilities as the Lord, but he's managing thanks to everyone's help. He thinks he'll never be able to match him, but he'll do his best to fulfill his duties, so he joins his group, and they set off for Canaire. They attend a meeting between the lords, and Lumiere asks them to pray in honor of Raven before starting. He officially announces Ars as the head of the Leuven house, and Ars declares that he'll do his best to fulfill his duty. Orsolot notices that he's more confident, and everyone sees him as an equal, so they have high hopes for him. The meeting begins, and Lumiere talks about the hostilities between the brothers, Courin and Vas. Courin was able to raise an army, but Vas is in Arcantes, the capital of Missian, so he has more soldiers and resources. But Renard mentions that Courin is in the commercial city of Semplar, which gives them economic superiority. Renard thinks the power of both cities is balanced, so the loyalty of the surrounding districts will be the deciding factor. Courin is trying to secure the neighboring districts, but the district of Perina refuses to yield to the pressure. Perina is a minor domain with a small army, but the shortest route to attack Arcantes passes through it, so they need to capture it to gain strategic advantage. Lumiere explains that he wants to avoid unnecessary fights, but the resistance at Perina forces him to subdue the area. Everyone seems determined, but Ars asks for permission to try to convince Perina to join them, and this catches them by surprise. Days earlier, we see that Rizal suspected Perina's behavior, as they're too vulnerable to an attack from them. So he wonders why Perina is trying to resist, and thinks they shouldn't attack before knowing their reasons. Ars asks for suggestions, so Reitz suggests hiring a group of mercenaries called Shadow, which specializes in gathering information. Ars asks him to contact them, so Reitz agrees, and Rizal advises Ars to offer to handle Perina if the topic comes up during the council. Back at the meeting, Ars explains his suspicions to the lords, so Lumiere is convinced, and asks him to try to find out what's going on. Ars is relieved that the meeting is finally over, since it still makes him nervous, but everyone comments that he was amazing. They suddenly notice the orphans greeting them, and Charlotte can't believe how much they have grown. She gives them smoked meat, as Ars realizes that they're doing well in the orphanage he built, and we learn that he ordered his people to take in as many street children as possible. He realizes that they have grown a lot, as they start expressing what they want to do after leaving the orphanage, thanking Ars for changing their lives. He mentions that Charlotte sends most of her salary to help run the place, so they also thank her. She's happy that Ars built the orphanage in a big city like Canaire, thinking it's a great idea, and he agrees with her, because the children have more opportunities in the city. But he's surprised to see Lisha, who explains that she decided to accompany her father to the meeting, so she came to see her fiancé when she found out he was also in town. Ars thinks she shouldn't bother, and doesn't know how to act, as Lisha sees the children around him, thinking happiness always follows him. One of the children suddenly dirties her dress, so Ars freaks out, but she just takes off her shoes, and plays with the child, so he thinks she's amazing. At night, Ars and the others stay at the orphanage, as we see Charlotte sleeping with the children. He's talking to Lisha, who wants to accompany him to meet the Shadow mercenaries, but he's worried about her going, telling her it's too dangerous. But he can't win the argument, so he gives up, and promises to pick her up at her lodging the next day. But she reveals that she'll spend the night at the orphanage, so they're shocked, and realize why she brought so much luggage. Ars decides to prepare her room, but she insists on sleeping with him, which surprises him even more. Charlotte wakes up with the commotion, so they end up fighting over who gets to sleep with him. Reitz and Rizal wonder what's going on, but Charlotte grabs Rizal, so that everyone can rest together. The next day, the boys note that they didn't get any sleep the night before, so they're still exhausted. Reitz informs them that the meeting with Shadow has been scheduled, so they thank the women at the orphanage for their hospitality. As they head to the bar, Reitz reveals that he got in touch with Shadow through a colleague from his mercenary days. He explains that mercenaries have different specialties, and Shadow's work includes more espionage and information gathering, but sometimes even assassinations. So Ars is afraid of them, but Reitz is more worried about the new leader of the group, explaining that he's extremely competent and he took them to another level. But Reitz reveals that he only accepts jobs that catch his attention, so Ars hopes he'll accept the job. They arrive at the bar, where they're served by beautiful waitresses, but a man tells them to leave, so Reitz gives him the secret code, and he allows them to enter. They wait at a table, but notice that everyone's glaring at them. Ars realizes that the leader might be in the room watching them, so he uses his ability to scan the area. But a waitress comes to take their order, and Ars seems surprised when he sees her stats. He becomes nervous and excuses himself to use the bathroom, where he checks Reitz's stats because he wants to make sure his ability is working correctly. He reveals that the waitress is actually a man who had a skill of 92 and an ingenuity of 90, so Ars sees him as a threat. He suddenly grabs Ars, threatening him with a knife, and he asks him how he found out he's the leader of Shadow. But Reitz throws a knife, so he releases Ars, and Reitz grabs his arm, telling him he has no idea who he's messing with. He wonders how Ars was able to ask for help, and Leisha suddenly enters, telling him not to underestimate them. She explains that he's obliged to listen to Ars's request to make up for his rudeness, and he tries to refuse, threatening to escape after eliminating Ars. But Leisha thinks he has already realized this isn't possible, because Reitz is capable of taking him down, explaining that she would hunt him down if he kills Ars. Ars realizes that she can be scary, and the chief laughs before accepting Leisha's request, but he's still curious about how Ars discovered his identity. So he reveals his power to see the stats and potential of people, calling him Mazik, which shocks him, because he hasn't used that name for a long time. He introduces himself as Fam, but acknowledges Ars's power for knowing his old name, and thinks his ability is a nightmare for a spy like him. He confesses that he likes him, and decides to accept the job, explaining that he must be a winning horse based on the people around him. Reitz congratulates Leisha, and she reveals that she noticed something was wrong with Ars's expression before he left them, so they decided to follow him. They tell Fam about the job, so he charges a gold coin, saying they need 5 days to gather the information, but Ars is shocked at how fast they are. We see Charlotte eating with Rizal as the trio returns to the bar and reveals that they have already managed to speak with the leader, and he approves the request. Fam interrupts them and offers a free meal to Charlotte, as Ars is shocked by his acting skills, thinking he moves like a girl. 5 days later, Ars and Reitz return to the tavern, but Fam is the only one there. He explains that everyone else is on other jobs, since investigations require a lot of manpower. He reveals that the request was a success, and Ars is shocked to learn that he personally handled their request after it piqued his interest. Ars realizes that his abilities put him at the top, which is why he's the leader of the Shadows despite his average leadership stats. Fam refuses to disclose his secrets about how he obtained the information, and decides to show why Purina won't ally with Kurin, giving Ars a piece of paper. It's a pact with signatures and seals of nobles allied with Vass, and Reitz notes that all Vass's allies would have a copy of this. They notice Purina's seal, but Reitz is shocked to see the mark of the district of Massa. He explains that it's a city near Lamberg, and the district has a large population, so it has one of the largest military forces on the continent, making it a valuable asset in the war. Reitz was happy that Massa had also allied with Kurin, but it seems they have betrayed them and will side with the younger son. He notices that if Kurin and his allies invade Purina, Massa can attack and neutralize them with a surprise attack, turning the war to the enemy's side. Fam thinks Purina has determined that Kurin will be the loser in the succession battle, which explains why they didn't agree to an alliance. But Reitz wonders if the alliance pact is genuine, since it's not easy to obtain such a document. So Fam repeats that he doesn't share his methods, and it doesn't matter how trustworthy he is, but assures that he found the document where the chief of Purina lives. Reitz apologizes for doubting him, and Fam understands it's a common doubt. Ars is impressed that he was able to obtain this information alone, thinking he's a true ninja. He decides to pay him, but Fam doesn't accept his money because he wants to make it up to him, reminding him that he was rude when they first met. So Ars thanks him, but decides to pay a little more for the next job, as he's grateful for the service. They go to Canaire, where they tell Lumiere the results of their investigation. but he questions the authenticity of the document, so Ars assures him that it came from the chief of Purina's house. Lumiere is surprised, since Adam, the chief of Massa, always thought highly of Kurin, and orders Renard to send the document to the other lords. He praises Ars for finding it, because it helped them avoid a bigger problem. Renard takes a closer look at the paper and notices something wrong with the signature and seal of Massa. He compares it with another document from the same district, and the differences become clear. Lumiere trusts Renard's eye, and Ars notes that his ability doesn't show the special skills of his target, so he realizes that he shouldn't judge people's capabilities based on their stats alone. They realize that Purina was tricked into thinking that Massa betrayed them, and they think this serves to buy time for Vass. Reitz believes that what the enemy actually wanted was a temporary alliance with Purina to allow them to mine explosive mana stones. Lumiere and Renard reveal that it's an extremely rare material, and Purina is one of the only places where it can be found. It allows mages to use powerful spells and weapons, so Vass likely wants to use the false alliance to mine as many stones as possible. Rizal rules out attacking Purina, and thinks the only option now is to tell the truth and win them back, because an unnecessary battle would only weaken their side. But Lumiere mentions that he sent numerous messengers and never got a response, so Ars has a plan. Ars manages to get an audience with the chief of Purina after writing a letter pretending to want to ally with Vass, and the chief wonders how he got his alliance paper. They discuss the sudden change of sides of the Massa district and how crucial it is for the war, as Ars mentions that small territories have to make sure they're on the winning side. But he wonders if the alliance paper is real, so the chief explains that he personally received the paper from Vass. But Ars reminds him how the chief of Massa has served Kurin all this time and wonders why he would betray his lord, asking the chief to reflect on why they'd choose to risk being surrounded by enemies. So he realizes that Ars only sent the letter to get an audience with him, and he orders his men to arrest them, but Reitz intervenes, stopping the attacks. Ars declares that they didn't come to fight, and the chief of Massa suddenly reveals himself, so the chief of Purina is surprised to see him, but Ars asks him to listen. We learn that this was Rizal's idea, and Adam was furious when he learned that his seal was forged and used in a cheap trick. He reveals that Massa didn't betray Kurin, since he never signed that paper, explaining that he'd never do that. Adam asks the chief if Purina is still on Vass's side, so he declares his intention to join Kurin's side, begging them to take him back after what he did. Adam mentions his duty as a count, so he understands that he was probably doing what's best for his people, but can't deny that he was easily deceived by a failure to investigate the matter. He remembers that Ars is responsible for clarifying everything, so he decides to leave the decision to him. Ars decides to forgive him, thinking everyone makes mistakes, and is happy to have resolved this without a fight. The chief of Purina feels ashamed, but he's also grateful, and he promises to help in the best way possible. Adam notes that the matter has been resolved, and also thanks Ars for avoiding an unnecessary fight, hoping for good things from him in the future. Ars returns home and tells his father everything that happened, noticing that Vass is extremely intelligent for thinking up such a plan. Ars thanks Rizal and Reitz for their help in avoiding the fight, and Ars wishes to become a great lord to continue protecting Lamberg. One of the maids runs up to them, telling them about Lumiere's arrival, and he has come to pay his respects to Raven. He also reveals that Kurin wishes to meet Ars, who is terrified to hear that Kurin is interested in him after hearing how he handled the Purina incident. He thinks he doesn't deserve to meet someone so important, and Lumiere reveals that they're about to see him. So Ars starts to freak out, but Reitz and Rizal encourage him to be strong, as this is a great opportunity. So Ars declares that it will be an honor, and Lumiere is happy to see his confidence. Charlotte tries to find a good dress for Kurin's banquet, but a maid reveals that they have already left, so she's devastated. On the way, Rizal feels bad for leaving Charlotte behind, but Reitz explains that someone needs to stay to protect the estate, and decides to pick up a gift for her on the way back. Ars is nervous, wondering why someone as important as Kurin wants to meet him. So Reitz explains that all the influential nobles were called, and Rizal thinks he wants to boost morale before the war. This only worsens Ars's condition, realizing that he'll be surrounded by the elite, so he needs to take care to not embarrass himself. They arrive in Semplar, and Ars is amazed by the sight of the commercial center. He notices how big the city is, and hopes that Lamberg will be as prosperous one day. Reitz comments that the banquet will be a great opportunity, since Ars can establish connections and enhance his reputation among the other nobles, so he's determined to do his part. At night, the banquet hall is filled with Kurin's allied nobles, and Ars is nervous because they keep staring at him due to his age. He notices that Lumiere is very popular among them, and they praise his great performance as always. Lumiere suddenly calls for Ars and introduces him to the others, revealing that he was responsible for resolving the conflict with Purina, so they think he's impressive. They suddenly hear the announcement of Kurin's arrival, so they lower their heads as he enters the hall. Ars uses his ability and finds that Kurin is indeed an excellent leader with great combat stats, realizing why Lumiere chose him. He also wonders about his brother Vas's stats, as rumors say he's even more impressive. But Ars realizes that perhaps the rumors are just an attempt to undermine Kurin's image, and wonders if someone could be planning a conspiracy. Kurin begins his speech and declares that they're in danger because Vas has waged war against him. He mentions that the Summerforth Empire has chosen not to intervene, despite his right to the succession of the Mysian Duchy. He explains that the empire is in decline, and thinks that their regime no longer works, so he wants to unite the districts and proclaim independence from the empire after defeating Vas. Everyone's shocked to hear this, and he acknowledges that it's a difficult task, but he's confident that he can achieve it with everyone's help, so they get excited and promise to do their part. He suddenly mentions Ars and asks him to come forward, recognizing how he was able to resolve a major problem without spilling blood, and everyone's surprised that a child was able to do this. Kurin orders everyone in the hall to applaud him, and they quickly follow Lumiere's lead. They start the banquet, as Rizal and Reitz start eating, but they notice that Ars is exhausted after socializing with all the nobles. He decides to get some fresh air on the balcony, and Kurin suddenly joins him. He wants to talk to him because he heard from Lumiere that he has a good eye for people and wonders what he thought of his subordinates. Ars had already seen their stats earlier and realized that there was no one impressive except for Lumiere. So he decides to tell the truth and confesses that he didn't see anyone with potential. Kurin becomes serious and asks if he thinks he has better subordinates, and Ars confesses that he does. So Kurin is pleased with his honesty and admits that he's right, since he has good men, but they lack talent. He knows that his brother has many talents, and is afraid that his military and economic superiority won't make a difference in the hands of incompetent leaders. So he explains he was excited to hear that a new talent had appeared, so he expects great things from him. He suggests an offer to Ars, promising to make him the chief of Canair if he helps him win the war. Ars wonders about Lumiere, so he explains that he wants to give an even higher position to him, since he actually trusts him. Kurin also asks Ars to give him his subordinates, but Ars refuses. So he asks him to help him find more talented people and invites him to his war council, so Ars hopes to live up to their expectations. On the other side, we see Vas in the Arkantes castle, discovering that Kurin learned about the false alliance and resolved the conflict in Purina. But his vassal Lemus assures him that they have acquired enough mana stones to win the war. His other subordinate Thomas reminds him that his brother doesn't have good commanders besides Lumiere, so the chances of losing are low. But Vas doesn't seem satisfied, and explains that he only fights when he has a 100% chance of winning. He asks Thomas about the whereabouts of Muriel, and he confesses that he doesn't know, thinking she's drinking herself to death. But Vas wants her on his side, and thinks they should put their past behind them. But Thomas refuses the idea, thinking she's just a drunk now, but Vas believes she's a capable woman, so he decides to hire her. Ars finally returns home, and Charlotte is surprised that they were invited to Kurin's war council. Ars thinks it's a great responsibility, wanting to find talented people for Kurin, and Reitz suggests using the Shadow Mercenaries. So the next day, they meet with Pham and offer 20 gold coins if he finds someone capable, so he promises to complete the job. They leave the bar, and a person bumps into Ars, knocking him down, so she helps him up, but Reitz scolds her for the incident. We learn that this is Marielle, and she asks for a job at the bar since she's homeless, but she can tell that Pham is a man. The bartender appears, telling her they aren't hiring, and he remembers her as a bad customer, so he wants her to leave, but Pham stops him, finding her interesting. He wonders what he's doing, but she caught his attention because she was able to see through his disguise. So he introduces himself to Marielle with a fake name, and he hires her. But her first day is a disaster, as she keeps messing up orders and drinking while she's working. After they close, Pham decides to ask her some questions, and Marielle realizes he has ulterior motives, but answers anyway. She explains that she used to work for the Duke of Missian with her brother, and heard that he died recently. The bartender thinks she's lying, but Pham believes her and offers her a better job. Ars receives a letter from Pham, who mentions that he found someone, and he announces that they'll be visiting the mansion. Pham arrives and introduces Marielle to them, but Ars realizes she's the person who bumped into him. The trio doesn't think she's anything special, and Reitz asks Pham if he's sure, so he assures them she's as talented as any of them. Marielle is impressed that the Lord of Lamberg is a child, and asks him if he'll hire her. So Ars uses his ability on her, realizing that her stats are insane, so he thinks she's a monster. Pham mentions that she used to work for the Duke, so Ars finds her impressive. But Reitz knows about her reputation, and he warns Ars that her brother Thomas is working for Lord Vass. She explains that she doesn't get along with him, but Reitz doesn't believe her, telling Ars not to hire her, but he decides to accept her as his vassal anyway, because he knows she has incredible talent. The next day, Reitz complains about Marielle's behavior, saying she isn't fit to be a vassal, because she's always slacking off, and she even leaves work just to sleep in her room. So he thinks she's a lost cause, telling Ars to fire her immediately. Rizal suddenly joins them, saying he doesn't want Marielle to teach him because she told him to stop studying and forced him to run instead, so he questions her methods, thinking she's insane. Ars tries to defend her, but they suddenly hear an explosion, so everyone panics, thinking they're under attack. But they realize that Charlotte was behind it because Marielle asked her to demonstrate her powers. Ars tells them to be careful, but he realizes that everyone's upset, and we learn that they hate Marielle because she's giving them a hard time. But she tells them to accept her for who she is, and Ars warns her to behave, or he'll be forced to take action. She explains that she doesn't want to leave him, because he's the only person who accepted her for who she is, so she realizes that she needs to get along with the others. So she suggests having a mock battle, telling them to let her stay if she wins. Ars is against this, but Reitz wants to see what she's made of, so he decides to fight her. We see Ars gathering his men, but he's surprised to see Leisha, who reveals that she wants to watch the mock battle. He explains the rules of the game, saying everyone will be divided into 2 teams, and they will be fighting in the eastern forest until the sun sets. To win the game, they need to capture the enemy commander, or wipe out the other team, and Ars explains that if a soldier is hit on the head or chest, he will be eliminated from the game. Charlotte wonders if she can use magic, so Ars tells her she can't use fire spells, because it's too destructive, and he gives her magic potions, as she realizes that only light and sound magic are usable in the game. Ars is about to divide everyone into 2 groups, but he notes that nobody wants to join Marielle, because they all want her to lose. A soldier explains that Marielle will be fired if she loses, so he suggests letting the noobs take her side, and the soldiers start to argue. But she doesn't care, and they think she's despicable, so they all want to get rid of her. After that, we see Reitz's team in the woods, as Charlotte mentions that they're far stronger than the enemy team, but she thinks Marielle is amazing, so they shouldn't underestimate her. Rizal is their commander, and we learn that he's afraid of the girls, but he tells Reitz to do his best. Ars is the commander of Marielle's team, and we see that it's filled with noobs, so he thinks they're in trouble, thinking Reitz is going to destroy them. Marielle thinks he's a great fighter, and she knows that Charlotte's magic is devastating, so she's impressed that Ars was able to discover their talents. She mentions that her soldiers are weak, so they become upset, but she tells them she's just telling the truth, and she's confident that they're still going to win. She knows they don't like her, but she tells them she has a plan, and they decide to go with it. Ritz's team sets up traps in the forest, and he discusses their battle plan, knowing Muriel's team can't defeat them head-on, so they will probably use sneak attacks to gain the advantage. He suggests attacking them directly, saying he will lead half of the soldiers at the front, while Rizal's team follows him from behind. He believes Muriel will try to capture Rizal, so he tells him to use sound magic as soon as he gets ambushed, so that they can surround the enemies. He tells everyone to remain calm, reminding them that they have the advantage, and they decide to follow his plan, as Ritz leads his group to patrol the area. But they suddenly hear an explosion, realizing that someone fell for their trap. So they rush to the scene, and they see a mage from Muriel's team, who reveals that he wants to betray her, so he tells them about her plan. He explains that she knows what they're up to, so she's planning to lure Ritz's group into a trap, so that they won't be able to help Rizal when she attacks him. But Ritz doesn't trust the boy, thinking Ars would never agree to her plan, so he admits that he was lying, saying Muriel wanted him to fake a betrayal, but he explains that he hates her, so he wants her to lose. He tells Ritz's team about her real battle plan, revealing that she's planning to surround them after she lures them to a certain area, and he mentions that she will make her move after he uses sound magic. But Ritz still doesn't trust him, so he tells him to surrender his wand, and he agrees to this, but Ritz suddenly orders his men to capture him. He asks Ritz why he's doing this, so he explains that he finds him suspicious, and the soldier realizes that he's hiding another wand. So Ritz asks him if he was planning to use it to cast sound magic, and he tries to deny this, but Ritz intimidates him, so he becomes scared, and he admits to it. Ritz thinks the enemy is still waiting for the signal, so he plans to attack them from behind. He leads his men around the woods, and they see a group of enemy soldiers waiting nearby, so they launch a surprise attack. But they immediately realize that the soldiers are all dummies, and Muriel reveals that everything went according to her plan, telling the boy that his acting was amazing. Ritz asks her why she's alone with Ars, reminding her that all they need to do is capture him to secure victory. But she reveals that she's confident in her ability to escape, and she starts carrying Ars, as she challenges them to catch her if they can. So Ritz orders everyone to attack, and they start hunting her down. We see Lisha and the others cheering, and Ars thinks they're going to get caught, but Muriel tells him not to worry. Ritz is determined to win, but his men suddenly trip over. They all run into traps, and even Ritz is caught, but he jumps back out. He charges right through the other traps, so Muriel uses her sound magic on them. They're all stunned, and wonder where Muriel went, but Ritz manages to see her. He continues to chase, and Muriel notes that they haven't gotten the signal yet. Meanwhile, Lisha gets jealous of Muriel since Ars is holding onto her, so she cheers for Ritz to win. We see Rizal's group, as Charlotte wonders if they should regroup with Ritz, but they are suddenly found by Ars's soldiers, who activate their signal. Rizal notes that this is only half of Ars's soldiers, so she thinks they have the advantage in an even fight. He orders his men to attack, and Ars's soldiers know they aren't as strong, but they remember Muriel talking about how the other soldiers called them weak, so she thinks they should teach them a lesson. More of their soldiers suddenly appear, completely surrounding Rizal's group, and they start to fight. Charlotte runs away with Rizal, and she uses sound magic to get away from the soldiers, but this lets Muriel know their location. Ritz wonders why Rizal is nearby, and we see that Charlotte was also caught by her own magic. Rizal continues to run, and we learn that Muriel's objective wasn't to provoke Ritz and split him from his soldiers, but it was to find a way to get Rizal. Ritz realizes what they are after, but Muriel speeds up. Ritz is able to keep up, and he thinks about how Ars saved him and his promise to stay by his side. He's determined to be Ars's most loyal guardian, so he refuses to lose to Muriel. Ars starts to get dizzy, but Muriel sees Rizal approaching them. Ritz is about to catch them, but Ars throws his sound magic at him. Muriel prepares to attack Rizal, and Ritz refuses to stop, but Muriel manages to land the hit first, and Ritz admits defeat. Ars announces Muriel as the winner, and all of her soldiers celebrate. The veteran soldiers complain about their dirty tricks, but Reitz notes that there's nothing that's unfair in a battle, so they must accept the result. He still doesn't like Muriel's attitude, but acknowledges her ability and hopes to learn from her in the future. Ars worries about Muriel ruining the moment, but she tells Reitz he was incredible, and she notes that Rizal's strategy to split up was the right thing to do. She thinks things are going to be interesting, and she compliments Ars for having such amazing retainers, wondering what he plans on doing. He mentions how he just wants to have a place where everyone can be happy, so she realizes he doesn't want a world with war, and she thinks he will need to become king to achieve his goal. Ars is shocked by what she means, but she tells him that he has what it takes. They all have a feast to celebrate the success of the mock battle, and Muriel outdrinks everyone. The soldiers ask her to teach them, but she notes that they're already getting the best training from Reitz, so there's nothing for her to teach them. Rizal realizes he needs to work on his stamina, thinking they could have won the battle if he ran faster. He always thought his tactics were enough since he's the strategist, but Muriel notes that if he gets caught or dies on the battlefield, more soldiers will be lost, so he needs to be able to stay alive. Rizal is determined to get stronger, but Charlotte suddenly runs into him, and Muriel tells her to fire spells at him to help him run faster. Ars is glad to see everyone getting along with Muriel, but he thinks about what she said about becoming the king. Reitz approaches him, and he apologizes for losing the mock battle. Ars tells him it's okay, but he remembers his promise to Raven, and he's ashamed of his failure. Ars tells him he still has faith in him, and Reitz promises to train twice as hard. Ars wonders what he thinks about what Muriel said, but Reitz says that he feels the same way. Ars thinks of his dream to have a world without war, where everyone can be happy, and Reitz promises to stay by his side and help him achieve his goal. We see Ars's group making their way to Semplar, as Muriel and Charlotte ride on top of the carriage, but Ars tells them to come down, telling them they need to talk about the military council. But they invite him to join them, saying he needs to unwind, and Reitz mentions that the war might last a long time, so he thinks they should relax. They see the ocean, and Charlotte reveals that it's her first time seeing it, so they decide to check it out. She drinks the water, but she spits it out, realizing it's salty, and Muriel laughs at her, saying she has been to many different places, so she understands how exciting it is to see a new world. Ars promises to go on a trip with them once the war is over, and Rizal mentions that there are fish in the water. So Charlotte runs to him, but she blasts the ocean, saying she just felt like doing it, and a man gets angry at them, so they quickly run away. They arrive at the Semplar castle, where they meet the other nobles, but they look down on him, since he's from the country. He meets Lumiere, who's happy to see him there, and Kurin approaches him, but he's surprised to see Muriel, revealing that she declined his offer to work for him because she didn't want to get involved in the politics. So he asks her why she's working for Ars, and she explains that she has taken a liking to him, saying he's a better master than Kurin. The other nobles think she's despicable, but Kurin just laughs at her, telling her she hasn't changed at all, and he mentions that he's glad to see her there. A noble mentions that she could be a spy, because her relative Thomas is working for Vass, but Kurin vouches for her, saying she could help them learn more about their enemy. He reveals that her performance was excellent while she was working with the previous duke, so he thinks they need her to succeed, and he asks the other nobles to work with her. They begin the military council, as an official reveals that their enemies outnumber them, but the trading city of Semplar gives them economic advantage. He adds that their soldiers are well trained, but Kurin mentions that the enemy has experienced generals, and he explains that the neutral nobles are starting to side with Vass, because they think he's winning. He asks for ideas that could help them turn the tide of battle, and a man suggests taking Belzud, which is one of the 3 main cities, thinking the neutral nobles will support them if they succeed. But Ars realizes that Kurin isn't impressed, and he tells Muriel to tell everyone her opinion. So she mentions that the plan sounds ridiculous, saying they will lose if they send soldiers to take Belzud, because Vass will attack Semplar while it's defenseless, and it will give him the advantage, so the neutral nobles would choose to side with him. She thinks the man who suggested attacking Belzud is a fool, so the nobles become angry, but Kurin mentions that he agrees with her, asking her if she has ideas that could help them win the battle. So she tells Rizal to share his plans, as Ars reveals that he's their tactician, but the nobles look down on him, thinking he's too young to come up with a good strategy. But Kurin tells him to speak, so he explains that they can't leave Simplar defenseless, and he suggests forming an alliance with the Duchy of Paradil because it's close to Arkantes. He mentions that Vass won't attack them if this happens, because he will be afraid that Paradil might attack Arkantes while his soldiers are away. The nobles think Paradil will never become their ally, but Rizal mentions that they need a third party to help them, saying they should bribe the Emperor. But the nobles think he already has all the money he needs, so a bribe won't work on him, but Reitz explains that he's still 17 years old, so his vassals are running the empire for him, and Reitz thinks they will accept the bribe. Kurin likes the idea, and he decides to go with it, telling Ars to take care of everything, because his subordinate came up with the plan. Kurin promises to cover the expenses, and he orders Lumiere to support Ars, who realizes that the other nobles are glaring at him, but he promises not to let Kurin down. After that, Ars's group celebrates, as Miriel mentions that Ars will beat the other nobles if their plan is successful. He thinks he's doomed if they end up failing, but his vassals tell him not to worry, and Charlotte wonders how they're supposed to negotiate with the Emperor. He thinks Reitz might be able to do it, but he mentions that the people in the capital are racists, so they shouldn't send him to negotiate, and Miriel explains that she's a terrible negotiator, so Charlotte thinks they should look for Lisha. Ars visits Lisha's house, and she immediately greets him, telling him she missed him. Hammond welcomes him to their house, asking him what happened during the military council, so he explains that he needs to talk to Lisha about their plan, but she tells him they should eat first. Reitz thanks Hammond for the meal, and he tells Reitz not to mention it, because he's also their guest, saying Lisha thinks highly of him. They realize that she already left with Ars, and we see her outside, telling him that she started to talk to the people in her town after she met him. She mentions that she cares about the territory, telling him she respects him because he's keeping the town safe, and she reveals that her father told her he's doing well. She walks closer, but she mentions that she wants to show him something, and he notes that she's acting strange. She shows him the flowers he gave her, telling him she liked them, so she decided to plant more of them. She asks him what he wanted to talk about, so he tells her about the plan, saying they need someone to negotiate with the Emperor, and she immediately agrees to do it, saying she will do anything for him. But she tells him to marry her after the war, and he thinks it's too sudden, but she explains that she always wanted to be with him since they first met. He realizes that she likes him, and he recalls how she's always there to help him, as he notes that he also has feelings for her. He apologizes for being useless, and he tells her to marry him immediately, telling her he loves her, so he promises to protect her no matter what happens. But she explains that she doesn't need to be protected, telling him to carry on with his tasks, as she promises to help him achieve his dreams. They tell Hammond that they're about to get married, so he freaks out, thinking it's too early for them to become a married couple, but Lisha explains that she has already made up her mind. So he decides to support them, and they have a banquet to celebrate their marriage. After that, they have a meeting with Pham, who tells them that the Prime Minister Shakma is the one who's holding the Emperor's power, and he has a reputation for being selfish and greedy. So Lisha thinks they should persuade him, but Pham warns them to be careful. Ars tells everyone about the plan, saying they will travel by ship to the imperial capital, where they will tell Shakma to act as their mediator before negotiating with Paradil. He mentions that Lisha will be their negotiator, and Miriel reminds them that they're still kids, but Lisha tells her not to worry because she plans to bring Lumiere with her. She explains that the adults won't trust them because they're just kids, so bringing Lumiere with them will make them look more convincing. Miriel thinks she deserves to be Ars's bride, but Charlotte doesn't want her to marry him, reminding her that they're about to start a war, so it's not the right time to get married. But she tells Charlotte she's amazing, saying she wants to learn how to use magic with her, and Charlotte becomes flattered, so she agrees to be her teacher. Rizal notes that Lisha is an excellent manipulator, and Ars asks Charlotte to join them as their bodyguard, saying it's a rare chance to ride a ship, so she decides to join them. They ride a carriage, and they realize that Charlotte fell asleep, but Lisha thinks it's okay, because it's going to be a long trip. Ars sees a suspicious man, and he realizes that it's Pham, who tells them that Vass has allied with Sates, and he promises to reach out to them once he gets more intel. Ars thinks this is terrible news, because Kurin's forces could get invaded from both sides. But Lisha tells him not to worry, because Peridot could help them defend their territory, so she thinks they just need to win the negotiations and make Peridot their ally. Ars is impressed by the way she thinks, but their carriage hits a rock, causing her bag to fall, and he realizes that she's been reading books about politics. She admits that she's trying to learn more about it, and he thinks she's amazing, saying he should try to be as diligent as her. She mentions that she wants to do everything in her power to assist him, because she's his wife, and they're both determined to make the negotiations successful. They arrive at the Semplar castle, where Kurin tells them about Sates, but Lisha tells him they already know, and she suggests negotiating with Sates until they return. He realizes she's brilliant, telling Ars that he chose his wife well, but a man interrupts them, and he introduces himself as Len, the eldest son of Kurin. He thinks Ars can't negotiate with Shakma because he's just a kid, but Kurin tells Len he's being rude, so he immediately apologizes, and he walks away, as Ars uses his appraisal skill. After that, Kurin reveals that he's worried about Len, because he's already 20 years old, but he's still acting like a spoiled brat, so Kurin thinks he has failed as a father. He asks Ars if he was able to see Len's stats, wondering if he has talent, so Ars reveals that his current stats are low, but he has the potential to become a great leader someday, and Kurin is happy hearing this. Ars and his vassals head to the port, where he buys a gift for Lisha, and she promises to treasure it. They board the ship, and Ars thanks Lumiere for joining them, but they realize that Len is with them, so Ars asks him if Kurin gave him permission. But he explains that he's already an adult, so he can decide for himself, telling them he will help them succeed, but Ars is worried that he could ruin everything. Charlotte enjoys the journey, because it's her first time riding a ship, but we see everyone getting seasick, and Len tries to pretend that he's okay, but he suddenly throws up. They see a group of men stranded at sea, and they decide to save them, but as Charlotte gives one of them water, he suddenly takes her hostage. He threatens to kill her if they don't hand over their belongings, but she burns his knife, and she blasts the men with her spell. They get tied up, and Len thinks they're pirates, so he plans to have them executed, but Ars asks them what they do for a living, because they were using a kitchen knife meant for catching fish. So one of them explains that they're fishermen, revealing that they used to borrow money from the Empire to go fishing, but the Empire ran into financial problems, which made it harder for them to get a loan, so they had no choice but to borrow money from merchants. But they're struggling to pay the interest, so they decided to commit crimes, saying they had to make money because they have families to feed. Ars decides to give them items, telling them they can sell it for 3 gold coins each, but the man refuses to accept it, saying they don't need his sympathy. But he tells them it's a loan, telling them to use the money to go fishing and pay him back once they've made enough money, telling them he won't charge interest. Len thinks they can't be trusted, but Ars mentions that he needs to believe in people so that he can gain their trust. He decides to let them go, and Charlotte hopes that someday they will come back. They arrive in the imperial capital, but they immediately realize that it's filled with homeless people, and they note that the nobles are extremely rich. Ars realizes that the gap between the rich and the poor is massive, and Lisha tells him to go ahead, saying she needs to prepare for the negotiation. The next day, they see Lisha wearing a new outfit, saying she found them in the imperial capital, but Ars wonders why she decided to change her clothes, so she tells him he's about to find out. They head to the castle, where they meet Shakma, and Ars checks his stats, realizing his intellect and ambition are high, so he thinks they will have a hard time negotiating with him. Shakma knows that they need the Emperor to mediate negotiations with Peridot, asking them how much money they can offer him. Lisha is about to tell him the amount, but we cut to the night before, as she tells everyone that they only have 2,000 gold coins to offer, so they will have to return to Semplar if Shakma demands a higher amount. She thinks they need to make him feel like he made a profit, so she decides to start with 500 gold, and he mentions that it's nowhere near enough, telling them he will need 5,000. But she tells him that the Imperial City's annual budget is lower than 5,000, so she thinks he must be joking, telling him she knows about the city's financial problem. She offers to give him 800 gold, but he demands more, so she increases it to 900, but he still refuses, and he's about to walk away. But she stops him, telling him they will pay him 1,000 gold, and she mentions that it's all they have. He accepts her offer, and Ars thinks she's amazing, because everything went according to her plan, but Len reminds them that they have 2,000 gold, and he wants them to give all of it to Shakma. So he realizes they were deceiving him, and he cancels the negotiation because he feels insulted. He mentions that he will change his mind if they give him more than 2,000 gold, and Ars tries to stop him, but he leaves the room. So Ars falls into despair, realizing they have failed, and he starts blaming Len for the disaster, but he still thinks he did the right thing, because he didn't want the Empire to think that Simplar is poor, but Lisha tells them to calm down. She chases after Shakma, and she apologizes for what happened, but he thinks she has no money left, so he tells her to return to Simplar. But she removes her clothes, and she offers to give it to him, telling him it's worth 500 gold. His companion inspects it, realizing she's telling the truth, so Shakma decides to help them negotiate with Peridot. He wonders if Missian wants to become independent, so Len tells him they do, saying they aren't loyal to the Emperor. But Shakma doesn't care, telling them they need to pay close attention as they negotiate with Peridot. After that, they return to the inn, and Ars mentions that he was afraid because they ran into trouble, but Lisha tells him he didn't have to worry because everything went according to her plan. She explains that their priority wasn't to keep the price as low as possible, but to reach a deal, saying they couldn't have wrapped things up if Len didn't reveal their budget. She mentions that she did her research, so she knows that Shakma wasn't satisfied with 1,000 gold, and he was just looking for an excuse to raise the price. Len's statement gave him the excuse he needed, and she knew he was going to walk away, so she decided to buy the dress before the negotiation, because she wanted to offer it to him as a final act of desperation. She mentions that it worked, because he was satisfied with their offer, and Charlotte thinks she's brilliant, but Len thinks they're evil, and he walks away, so Lumiere decides to talk to him. Len explains that he can't stand his companions, because they lied during the negotiations, thinking they can't be loyal to Missian, because they lack credibility. But Lumiere tells him he was born into power, so he never had to lie for his people, saying Ars and Lisha lied to protect Missian. But he runs away, as Lumiere recalls that he used to look after him, and he thinks Len has the potential to become a great leader, but he still has much to learn. A week later, a messenger from Peridot arrives, and we learn that Len never returned to the others after the incident, so Ars wonders what he's been doing all this time. They negotiate with the foreign minister of Peridot, as Ars notes that they're loyal to the Emperor, so they won't be moved by money. The minister asks them if they seek independence, saying it's considered as treason, but Len tells him that it's what Vass's faction is after, and the minister believes him, so he agrees to form an alliance with Missian. They return to the inn, and Ars can't believe that the minister trusted them so easily, but Lisha tells him it's all thanks to Len. We learn that he visited her room after they talked to Shakma, and he apologized for his actions, telling her he now understands that they lied to protect Missian. He admits that he's a fool, but he wants to do his best to serve his people, and he asks her to teach him. So she told him to attend the dinner parties at the capital, and she mentions that everyone believes in him because they know that he almost ruined his negotiation with his honesty. So when he told the nobles that Vass's faction wants to become independent, they believed him, and a rumor spread that Vass isn't loyal to the Emperor. Len thinks he caused trouble for everyone, but Lisha tells him his willingness to change is a beautiful thing, and Ars thanks him for helping with the negotiation. He mentions that he wants to work hard to make Missian a better place, and he's looking forward to working with Ars to achieve his goal. They return to Simplar, where Kurin welcomes them back, and he thanks them for changing the tide of battle. But he wonders why Len joined them, and he starts scolding him, but Len apologizes for leaving without permission, saying he now knows that he has much to learn. He heads to the training ground, as Ars activates his skill, realizing that Len's stats have increased. Kurin shows them their reward, saying they will each receive 100 gold, and Ars accepts it, planning to use the money to make Lamberg a better place. Kurin mentions that their next plan is to invade the Alfarda district, and he tells Ars and Lumiere that they will command the soldiers of Canair, ordering them to gather their troops in Simplar next month. After that, Charlotte wonders if Ars is okay, thinking he's nervous because he's about to have his first battle. So he admits that he's afraid, but he tells her he's going to be fine, saying he doesn't want to let his father down. 2 weeks later, we see Rizal training at the Leuven mansion, and Muriel tells him to keep going, but he explains that he's already exhausted, reminding her that she promised to teach him about tactics. Reitz joins them, and he mentions that she can't teach Rizal about tactics because she's already drunk. He confiscates her beer, telling her she can't drink while she's working, and she tells him Ars never stopped her from drinking. But Rizal tells her not to mention Ars while she's talking to him, and they realize that he has already lost it, as he wonders why his master hasn't returned yet. He thinks he needs to look for Ars, but Muriel reminds him that his task is to watch over the mansion, and she assures him that Ars will return. So he calms down, and Ars suddenly appears, so they welcome him back. They have a feast together, and Ars tells them they need to leave with their soldiers after 2 days, so Reitz decides to hold a final mock battle before they leave. But Ars thinks it won't be necessary, because he believes that their soldiers are ready for battle. After that, Ars walks around the village with Lisha, telling her he wants to spend time with her before he goes to war. But the villagers are worried about him, because he might die during the war, telling him they don't want to lose him. They tell him to stay healthy, and they give him food, so he thanks them for their kindness. He walks home with the food, and Lisha thinks they should give it to the people in the mansion, but he tells her he wants to visit his father before they go home. So she tells him she'll be waiting for him in the mansion, because she knows that he wants to talk to him in private. He visits Raven's grave, and he tells him about everything that happened, saying he's about to have his first battle. He wonders if he's ready for combat, but he knows that he needs to do it to protect his people. His vassals also visit the grave, and they tell Raven that they will protect Ars, saying they're confident that they're going to win the war. The soldiers prepare to leave, as Lisha gives Ars his sword, telling him she's going to protect the mansion while he's away, so that he can focus on the battle. The soldiers gather at the Semplar Plaza, as Kurin appears before them, and he thanks them for answering his call, telling them their goal is to take Arkantes. But he mentions that they must first occupy Belzud, saying they can now make their move, because they have secured the aid of Paradol. He's confident that they're going to win the war, telling his soldiers to fight for Missian, and they get fired up, as Ars notes that they aren't afraid to die. He realizes that it feels reassuring to have an army by his side, because they're all willing to risk their lives for the same goal, and Kurin orders everyone to move out. Ars and the others head to Alfarda, as his soldiers tell him not to worry, because they will protect him, and he tells them he's glad to have them by his side. Lumiere notes that they're all rooting for him, so he thinks Ars is a talented commander, because he has the ability to win over his subordinates. They see the city of Alfarda, and Kurin gives the order to attack, but the enemy suddenly surrenders. After that, Ars wonders what happened, so Kurin tells him that the enemy lost the will to fight, because they realize that they're outnumbered. He explains that there shouldn't be any large-scale battles until they reach Belzud, but he tells Ars not to let his guard down. Meanwhile, we see Thomas in the Samek castle, as he tells the county chief Fred that he's there to defend the city. Fred is glad to have him around, and Thomas mentions that they will win the battle, saying he will take care of everything. After he leaves, Fred's daughter Selena tells him he shouldn't be so submissive because he's the county chief. But he explains that the war is too heavy for him to handle, so he wants to leave everything to Thomas, saying his order is to protect the Wakamakuro fortress, and she volunteers to do it for him. We see Kurin in a meeting, as he mentions that he wants to take Samek without casualties, and he asks everyone for ideas. So Rizal tells him about his strategy, saying there are 3 forts around the Samek castle, and each of them is protected by around 1,000 soldiers. His plan is to split their army into 3, and attack the 3 forts at the same time, saying they should be able to take all 3 of them, because they outnumber the enemy forces. He thinks Samek will surrender if they succeed, and Kurin decides to go with his plan, saying he will take charge of the main army, which will be stationed near the castle. He promises to join up with the others after they take the forts, and he orders Ars and Lumiere to capture the Wakamakuro fortress. Ars and Lumiere see the fortress, realizing it has the most important position, because it's the only place where they can see the Samek castle and the other forts. Ars asks Rizal if he has a plan, so he suggests sending scouts to the peak so that they can watch the enemy's movements before they attack the fortress. But Muriel tells him he still has much to learn, telling him that the best tacticians can predict their enemies' movements. She explains that their enemies are outnumbered, so they can't win no matter what formation they use, and she asks him what he would do if he were the enemy tactician. So he mentions that he would surround Ars's army as he attacks the fort, and she thinks they need to keep an eye on the foot of the mountain, because the enemies might attack them from behind. We see Selena in the fortress, as her subordinates tell her that Ars's army is approaching, so she uses her magic to create a barrier. Ars and his vassals see it, realizing they need to destroy it with their magic, so the soldiers prepare magic water, and the mages blast it with their spells, but it doesn't work. But Ars realizes that Charlotte still hasn't attacked, and she summons a massive fireball, which shatters the barrier, and everyone can't believe how powerful she is. Lumiere gives the order to attack, but the barrier is suddenly restored, so Muriel realizes that the enemy has a mage that can compete with Charlotte. Ars wonders if they will be able to break through, so Charlotte tells him not to worry, because she will destroy the barrier, and Lumiere orders his men to gather the magic water. But a mage receives a message from the scouts, and he tells everyone that 10,000 enemy soldiers are approaching. So Ars freaks out, and Muriel realizes that the enemy is sending their main army to defend the fortress. Rizal mentions that they can retreat down the mountain and escape from the enemy, but they won't be able to capture the fortress. He explains that they can also stay there, saying they will die if they fail to take the fortress, but if they succeed, they can hold out until Kurin arrives to save them. The mage mentions that it will take half a day to destroy the barrier, so Lumiere thinks they should retreat, but Ars thinks they can take the fortress because his vassals are extremely talented. He orders Reitz to delay the enemy, and he agrees to do it, saying that he just might even wipe them out. Charlotte promises to destroy the barrier in 1 hour, and she starts competing with Reitz, but the soldiers think they're going to fail. But Ars is confident in them, and he explains that the enemy will have the advantage if they retreat, so they should take the fort while they still have the chance. His vassals support him, and Lumiere decides to go with his plan, ordering his soldiers to press the attack. We see Vass's soldiers climbing the mountain, and they think they're going to catch their enemies by surprise, but they suddenly get ambushed, realizing they're surrounded. They see Reitz charging in, and they panic, because they recognize him as the Grim Reaper. We learn that his plan is to fight the enemies in a narrow path, so that they can't take advantage of their numbers, and he ordered his soldiers to surround them, so that they can't widen the front. The mages continue to attack the barrier, but Rizal notes that their magic water is limited, and he thinks the only way to defeat their enemy is to destroy the barrier faster than they can repair it. We see that Selena still has all the magic water she needs, saying Fred prepared it for her, but she feels insulted, thinking he gathered a ridiculous amount because he doesn't believe in her powers. She strengthens the barrier, and Rizal realizes that they're running out of magic water. Charlotte decides to consume all of them, so that she can use her ultimate spell, and Ars thinks they might be able to break the barrier. But the mage tells him it's dangerous, because her body might not be able to handle the magic water. But she mentions that she will do it for Ars, telling him to take care of her if she collapses. Reitz slices through the enemy soldiers, saying he's willing to do anything to help Ars win his first battle, and Charlotte casts her ultimate spell, causing countless fireballs to rain down onto the fortress. Selena tries to defend against it, but her barrier ends up breaking, and Charlotte asks Ars if he's impressed. So he tells her she's amazing, but she collapses, and he thanks her for her effort. Reitz returns with the others, saying they have won the battle, so everyone celebrates, as Muriel realizes how impressive they all are. Kurin praises Ars for capturing the fortress, but he wonders what will happen to Selena and her men, so Kurin notes that they'll be executed. Selena accepts her fate, thinking she deserves to die since she failed to defend the fort, so Kurin orders his soldiers to take them out. But Ars stops him, so he explains that it's too risky to let them live, because they might cause a riot and consume their supplies. But Ars notes that killing them is even riskier, since it would be impossible to unify Messian if their families bear a grudge against him. Rizal suggests letting Ars appraise the soldiers so that they can recruit those who have talent, and he explains that they can use the rest for prisoner exchange so that they won't have to kill anyone. Kurin decides to go with his plan, and Ars tells Selena not to throw her life away, reminding her about her duty to bring her soldiers back alive. He tells her he wants to work with her after the war, and she thanks him for sparing her men, but notes that she'd rather die with honor than live with shame. Charlotte knows that she was the one who set up the barrier, and she admits that she's jealous because her magic is destructive, but she can't use it to protect her allies. She tells Selena that her magic is suitable for a lord, and Kurin wants her to convince her father to swear allegiance to him, telling her it's their last chance. That evening, Ars mentions that he's tired because he appraised all of the soldiers, but Reitz tells him he was able to strengthen their army. Fam visits them, and he knows that Samet Castle is their next target, but he warns them that it's heavily defended, revealing that the only way to enter the castle is through the front gate. He notes that Thomas is the enemy commander, and everyone knows how dangerous he is, so they realize it won't be easy to take the castle. Meanwhile at Samet Castle, Selena apologizes for failing to defend the fort and mentions that she's ready to be punished, but Fred is just glad that she was able to make it back alive. But she wants him to punish her, wondering why he has changed, because he used to scold her whenever she failed. Kurin's army gathers outside the castle, and he realizes that they need to take it by force, so he orders his men to attack. The enemy captain is confident that they won't make it past the gate, and he orders his men to fire the cannons, but Kurin's army rushes forward, and the gate suddenly opens. The captain can't believe it, and a soldier wonders what happened, but he realizes that the shadows pulled the lever. We learn that Rizal told him to infiltrate the castle and open the gate from inside, because he knows that a frontal assault will be difficult. But Fam wonders how he can sneak in, because it's heavily defended, so Rizal tells him to blend in during the prisoner exchange. Selena learns that the front gate has been breached, so she orders her men to prepare for battle, but she realizes that Fred has already ordered them to surrender. In a flashback, we see Fred as he returns from an expedition, and Selena asks him what happened, so he tells her his story. She thinks he's amazing, because he became a lord through his military achievements, and she enjoys listening to his stories. He gives her his necklace, and tells her to wear it as proof that she has the courage to stand on the battlefield. But during the Succession War, she notices that he has changed, because he isn't as brave as he used to be. Back in the present, Fred tells Selena to run away with the others, but she refuses to give up without a fight. Thomas admires her resolve, and mentions that the castle is a lost cause, but he reveals that he has a plan to turn the tables. He shows them a catalyst for explosion magic, and explains that his plan is to use them to lure Kurin into the castle before blowing it up. Fred mentions that he should evacuate everyone first, but Thomas tells him they must sacrifice themselves, because Kurin won't enter the castle if it's empty. Selena is against his plan, because she doesn't want to use underhanded tactics, but Thomas explains that the world will remember Samet Castle if they defeat Kurin. Fred agrees to activate the catalyst when Kurin enters the castle, but Selena realizes that her people are afraid, and she recalls that it's her duty to protect them. So she tells her father not to go with Thomas's plan, and he crushes the catalyst, telling him he won't take orders from him. He explains that he wants what's best for his people, and tells Thomas he won't allow him to sacrifice them, so Thomas decides to leave, telling him he'll regret betraying Vass. Thomas's men are angry, and they try to take him down, so Selena rushes to protect him, but he easily defeats them, telling her he can still defend himself. After that, Fred surrenders to Kurin, and begs him to spare his soldiers, because they were just obeying his orders. He notes that he's ready to accept his punishment, but Kurin knows that he's a competent leader, so he wants Fred to join him. We see Thomas watching them from a distance, and he thinks they're doomed, because he has a backup catalyst. He activates it, but the forest explodes, and he wonders what just happened. Fam reveals that he disarmed the explosion traps, because Rizal ordered him to do it, but Selena wonders how they found out about Thomas's plan. Rizal explains that he knows how dangerous Thomas is, because he's willing to do anything to win, so Rizal ordered Fam to look for explosion traps in the castle. Fred apologizes for disappointing Selena, because he was so focused on strengthening his army that he started to obey them. but she explains that she learned something from Ars, telling Fred it's also brave to put down his sword, and she's glad that he welcomed her back after she failed to defend the fortress. Leisha's mate tells her about Ars's victory, and she maintains her composure, explaining that she needs to behave as the wife of a lord. But after her mate leaves, she starts celebrating, since his first campaign is successful. We return to Samet Castle, where Kurin tells everyone to rest for 3 days, and everyone's happy that they have time to enjoy themselves. Charlotte starts eating food, while Ars spends time with Reitz, who mentions that he remembers the time when he was Ars's only vassal. He mentions that he's glad Lamberg is improving, and Ars notes that he wants to end the war as soon as possible, because he wants the people to live in peace. They see a crowd gathering around a street vendor, who shows them his flying toy, but it crashes to the ground, so he loses his composure. But he mentions that he has other toys available, and he shows them his masterpiece, revealing that it has a magical doll that is powered by a wind mana stone. The people think there's nothing special about it, and Reitz notes that it's just a toy for kids, but Ars wants to buy it, so the merchant tells him it's worth 3 gold coins. Reitz notes that it's enough money to buy wheat for a whole year, but Ars knows that the toy is moving by magic, and he's impressed by its design. He mentions that there are no toys like it in this world, so he thinks the merchant must have incredible talent, and he uses his appraisal skill to check his stats, but he wonders why he can't see it. After that, Kurin gathers everyone for a meeting, and tells them they hold Semplar, but their enemy is occupying Belzud and Arkantes. He notes that they'll gain the upper hand if they capture Belzud, but Lumiere notes that it's a region with heavy snowfall, and it will be difficult to conquer it during winter. So he suggests invading it before winter sets in, and Kurin decides to split his forces into 2. He explains that the first group will attack the largest castle protecting Belzud, while the second group will assault the northern Rolto castle, telling them they can invade Belzud if they succeed. Lumiere and Ars are assigned to the second group, and Rizal notes that there are several fortresses near Rolto castle, but he thinks it's best to negotiate with them instead of using force. But they all refuse to talk to Ars, and he realizes that they won't surrender easily, so he wonders if he needs to capture all of them. But a soldier mentions that a new letter has just arrived, and he realizes that the leader of one of the forts is willing to talk, but he notes that the envoy must be a commander. Lumiere knows that it's from Baldson Fortress, and he mentions that it's under the command of Lord Lupa, who's a smart and capable commander. But Lumiere thinks he can't persuade him to join them, so he tells Ars to take care of it, telling him he believes in him. Ars heads to Baldson Fortress, where he tells the guards that he's there to negotiate with Lupa, and they ask his friends to drop their weapons. But Reitz prepares to take them on, and tells them to drop their weapons first. Ars thinks they should leave, because they might get killed as soon as they drop their weapons, but Muriel thinks the guards won't do that, because Lumiere can easily destroy their fort in retaliation. Reitz thinks the negotiation might be a trap for Ars, and Muriel notes that the fort is close to their camp, but they were the last to reply to the letters they sent. She thinks there's something unusual about them, and notes that Ars should learn of their true motives, because it will be valuable for negotiation. So he drops his weapon, telling Lupa he wants to negotiate with him, and the guards open the gate. He enters the fort with Reitz and Muriel, but he suddenly feels strange, and Reitz realizes that there's something wrong with his eyes. Lupa greets them, and he prepares to take them to his parlor, but Ars suddenly trips, and drops the toy he bought. The magical bird flies away, and it lands on Lupa's hand, as Ars tells him it's a child's toy. Lupa notes that he hasn't seen anything like it, so Ars offers to give it to him, but he mentions that he doesn't want it. Ars uses his appraisal skill, and he sees Lupa's stats, but he's surprised to see information about him. He realizes that Lupa has a wife, but he wonders why he can't find her in the fortress, and Lupa takes them to the waiting room, where Ars sees a child's chair. He analyzes the situation, and realizes what's happening, so he's confident that the negotiation will go well. Ars sits with Lupa, and asks him if his wife is doing well at the Rolto castle, because he knows that she will give birth soon. Lupa wonders how he found out about her, and his men threaten Ars, who knows that they were planning to kill him from the very beginning. He knows she's being held hostage at the Rolto castle, and she'll be executed if Lupa abandons the fort, so he has no choice but to fight to the death. He thinks the other forts are in a similar situation, and knows that Rolto Castle won't send reinforcements for them, so he believes that they have been abandoned. He thinks Lupa wants to negotiate with the commander so that he can kill him before his fort falls and save his wife from being executed. But Reitz wonders why he didn't execute them right away, so Ars notes that he was hesitating, thinking it's the reason why his reply to their letter was late. He tells Lupa he'll never meet his unborn son if he kills them, and he notes that he was ready to die fighting, but he wants to hold his baby in his arms. His soldiers cry hearing this, and Ars knows that he's an excellent general, so he wants him to join them in the future, telling him they'll infiltrate Rolto Castle to save his wife. Lupa thinks they won't succeed, but he knows that it's the only way he can meet his son, so he begs Ars to save his wife. Lumiere is impressed that the negotiation was successful, and Ars tells him about Lupa's situation, but Reitz wonders how they will save his wife, and Ars reveals that he doesn't have a plan. A man named Clement suddenly joins them and tells Ars that his soldiers are weak, so he checks Clement's stats and realizes that his combat prowess is over 100. Lumiere reveals that he's the leader of the Matro mercenary group, and Reitz knows about them because they're famous for completing any job they take on. Ars is honored to have them as their ally, but Clement tells him not to get the wrong idea because they're only working for the reward. Reitz is upset hearing this, and Clement knows that he's in charge of training the soldiers, telling him they're pathetic because they aren't prepared to die. Clement explains that mercenaries are different because they always fight to the end, so they have faced countless life and death situations. He tells Lumiere to leave the dangerous missions to them and let Ars take a break, but Lumiere assures him that Ars is an excellent commander. They start discussing the rescue operation, and they know that the families of the commanders are in Rolto Castle, but the exact location is unclear. Ars thinks they should hire the Shadows to rescue the hostages, but Muriel notes that there are 10,000 soldiers in the castle, so it will be impossible for them to do it alone. She suggests creating a situation to lure the soldiers out of the castle so that the Shadows can free the hostages, and Rizal comes up with a strategy. Meanwhile at Rolto Castle, we see the Lord Jean, as his soldier tells him that Lupa is holding back the Canare army. Jean thinks he's doing well, and he's confident that they'll win the war, because winter is about to set in. His general Dan mentions that he wants to fight, and another soldier reports to them, telling them they received a letter from Lupa. Jean reads it, and realizes that the Canare army has 10,000 soldiers, but they're planning to divide their army, and send half of it to attack Rolto. The soldier notes that they have a powerful mage who destroyed the barrier at Wakamakuro Fortress, so Jean realizes that his army will be at a disadvantage if they try to defend the city. He decides to fight the Canare army in the open because mages aren't good at close combat, and Dan promises to take care of them. We see Ars talking to Lupa, who reveals that he sent the letter as ordered, and he thinks he should join the fight. But Ars tells him to wait until the battle is over, because the enemy will execute his wife if they learn about his betrayal. He gives Lupa the toy, promising to rescue his wife, and he decides to wait for Ars to return. At Samek Castle, Rizal tells everyone about his plan, explaining that 5,000 soldiers will draw out the enemy, and they will pretend to retreat. When they reach the forest, the second half of the army will ambush the enemy forces, and everyone will work together to defeat them. He explains that during the battle, the Shadows will rescue the hostages, and Ars thinks his plan is perfect. But he notes that he's worried, and Reitz notes that it will be difficult to protect themselves while they're retreating, so the troops might get wiped out before they reach the forest. Clement volunteers to lead the decoy unit, but Rizal explains that they must make the enemies believe that they aren't using a special unit, so that they will send out their main force. We see Lumiere and Ars leading the decoy unit, and they prepare to take on the enemy's main force, while Ars tells his men that they're fighting for the peace of Messian. He orders them to charge, and they clash with enemy soldiers, but Dan's cavalry unit starts to overwhelm them. Charlotte blasts him with her magic, but it doesn't work, and Ars checks his stats, realizing his combat skills are almost on par with Reitz. His cavaliers also have high stats, so Ars realizes they're at a disadvantage, but Reitz tells the soldiers not to falter. Meanwhile at the castle, a soldier tells the hostages that the war has begun, so they need to move to safety, but Fam suddenly knocks him out. The hostages start to panic, but he tells them to come with him, explaining that his mission is to bring them back to their families. We return to the battlefield, as Lumiere orders the decoy unit to retreat, so they start running away, and Dan thinks about pursuing them. But Jean stops him, because he knows that their enemies are up to something, so the soldiers wonder if it's a trap. He decides to join the battle, telling Dan to circle around and split the enemy forces in two, but a soldier wonders if Jean will be okay, thinking he isn't a capable fighter. But Dan notes that Jean is tougher than him, revealing that they were both born into a family of cavalry chiefs, which is notorious for wiping out villages. But one day, Jean killed his father and presented his head to the Duke of Messian, who rewarded him by promoting him to nobility. We return to Ars, as Dan splits his forces, so Reitz orders his men to drive him away, but Jean suddenly appears, asking them why they're pretending to retreat. He starts killing the soldiers, as he notes that he doesn't need armor, because they're no match for his skills. They're about to reach the forest, but Ars realizes his men are getting slaughtered, and Lumiere tells him to call Clement, because they're about to get wiped out. But he orders everyone to stick to the plan, telling them they'll achieve victory as soon as they reach the forest. But they realize that the enemies have disappeared, and Dan suddenly attacks Ars, but Reitz protects him and cuts Dan's arm. Ars realizes that Reitz boosted his men's morale, but he sees soldiers ahead of them, so he thinks they're doomed. But the soldiers start attacking the enemies, and we learn that Lupa's forces have arrived to support Ars. So Dan realizes that he betrayed them, and he orders his soldiers to regroup, but he fires an arrow at Lupa before he leaves. Ars wonders why he joined the fight, because the enemies will execute his family if their plan doesn't work, so he explains that he was touched by Ars's willingness to save his wife. He knows that he might lose everything, but notes that he has no regrets, telling Ars he wants to serve him. He thanks Lupa for believing in him, but notes that they must win the battle, and Dan orders his men to use sound magic to tell the guards to execute the hostages. Fam tells the hostages they can escape through the drainage, and Lupa's wife Maria decides to go last, but they suddenly hear the alarm as the guards start looking for them. Fam hides with Maria, as he realizes that they can no longer use the drainage to escape, so he needs to find another way out, but he realizes that she's about to give birth. A guard is about to find them, but another guard mentions that the hostages are in the drainage, so they rush to look for them. Ars and his men make it to the forest, but Reitz notes that the enemy isn't chasing them, so he thinks they've seen through their plan, but Rizal is confident that they will appear. We see Jean telling his men it's a trap, and he notes that they should wait for the Khmer army to attack them in the castle, but a group of soldiers suddenly charges in. The other soldiers don't want them to take all the credit, so they follow suit, but Jean decides to abandon them, thinking he doesn't need them in his army. But he realizes that Dan has decided to join them, so he orders his soldiers to follow him. We see that Muriel led the group that charged ahead, and they're glad that their enemies followed them, because they can finally execute their plan. Rizal knows that it will be difficult for soldiers to stay put if they know they're winning the battle, because they can earn glory by defeating their enemies. So he asked Muriel's group to steal the enemy's armor during the battle, and wait for the perfect time to rush forth, because he knows that the other soldiers will follow her. Ars meets the Matro mercenary group, and Clement tells him he has already done his part, so he can leave the rest to them. They start cutting down the enemy soldiers, who freak out as they see Clement, because they recognize him as the war demon. So they try to retreat, but the mercenaries surround them and take them down, as Muriel notes that they can't escape, because the forest limits their movements. Dan appears, and the mercenaries try to stop him, but he breaks past them and charges at Ars. So Reitz protects him, and Dan falls off his horse, but he challenges Reitz to a duel. He mentions that he won't forgive Dan for attacking Ars, and they start fighting, as Ars checks their stats, realizing they both have 89 points in combat prowess. But Reitz struggles to keep up with Dan, because his weapon gives him the advantage, and he prepares to deal the finishing blow. But his weapon gets stuck in a tree, and Reitz knocks him down, as Ars realizes that he used his superior intellect to win the fight. Jean arrives with his men, and Ars realizes that his combat prowess is 92, but Clement prepares to take him on. He realizes that Dan has been captured, so he becomes angry and charges in, but Clement sends him flying, and everyone can't believe how powerful he is. Jean's men realize that he has been captured, so they decide to surrender, and Ars tells his men they've won the battle. So they start celebrating, but Dan suddenly breaks free and prepares to take his own life because he blames himself for the outcome. But Jean stops him, telling him he decided to follow him because he can't forget the moments they spent together. He's glad that Dan is still alive, and he tells Jean to stop crying, telling him they'll go home together after the war is over. The soldiers take them away, and Lupa is glad that the battle is over, but he suddenly collapses, and Ars realizes that he's seriously injured. He reveals that he didn't want to collapse during the battle, because it would damage their morale, and he tells Ars about his dream to have a peaceful life with his family after the war. Ars tells him not to give up on it, but he accepts his fate, and recalls that he has always lived in war until Maria opened up a new world for him. But she suddenly appears and tells him to hold on, and he immediately recovers, telling her he's glad she's okay. Fam reveals that it's his first time delivering a baby, and Clement holds onto his son as he cries tears of joy. After that, the soldiers bury their dead comrades, and Ars notes that they must win and bring peace to the land so that their sacrifices won't be in vain. The army sets up camp, and Reitz visits Ars in his tent, asking him why he's writing letters. So he explains that he wants to tell the families of the fallen soldiers about their bravery, and reveals that he still remembers what they did for him. He starts crying, and thinks his father won't be happy if he sees him weeping, but Reitz tells him there's nothing to be ashamed of, and helps him write the letters. Rolto Castle surrenders, and Lumiere notes that they just need to wait for Kurin to take Stott's castle, but Fam complains about his payment, because he's short by 1 silver. So Ars apologizes for his mistake, explaining that he was so busy that he miscalculated, and he promises to be more careful next time. He orders Fam to tell Kurin about their victory, and investigate the current situation at Stott's castle, so he tells Ars to give him another bag as payment for the task. That evening, Fam heads to Kurin's supply unit, but he sees that the storage area is on fire, so he asks a soldier what happened. He explains that the enemies ambushed them, and they've already lost more than half of their supplies and magic water, so Fam decides to tell Ars about it. Meanwhile at Stott's castle, we see the Chief Cans, who praises Thomas for the successful ambush. He explains that they're in a war of attrition, and they'll win when winter arrives, but he's sure that Kurin will come up with a plan, so Thomas suggests killing him before he can make his move. Cans knows it will be difficult since he's well guarded, but Thomas promises to take care of it, noting that he won't rest until he gets rid of Kurin. A soldier reports to Ars, and tells him Kurin's supply units were ambushed, so he lost his supplies and magic water. Muriel knows that Thomas was behind it, and Ars knows that winter is coming, so they can't prolong the battle. The soldier adds that the enemy's magic unit brought a large catalyst to Mount Torai, and Ars knows that it's close to Kurin's camp, so he wonders what they're doing there. Muriel knows what they're up to, and she knows that Shadow is still close to the supply unit, so she suggests ordering them to head to Kurin's base camp. Shadow receives a message from Muriel, and Fam realizes that they need to protect Kurin because his life is in danger. It suddenly starts raining, and we learn that Muriel predicted that the enemies would use rain magic, so that Kurin and his men won't be able to hear or see anything. We see that Kurin's camp is already under attack, and he realizes that the enemy wants to kill him, but he prepares to take them on, ordering his soldiers to drive them back. But a rider breaks past them and starts attacking Kurin, who realizes that it's Thomas. Kurin blocks his attacks, but he loses his footing, and Thomas tries to finish him off, but he dodges and stabs Thomas's leg. His men charge at Kurin, who suddenly gets surrounded by darkness, and Fam appears behind him, revealing that he was sent by Ars to save him. Kurin knows that he used shadow magic, which blocks the enemy's sight by covering him in darkness, and he's impressed that Fam can use it, because he knows that it's a difficult spell to master. They reach the forest, and Fam tells his men to escape with Kurin, while he stays behind to buy time for them. We see Thomas as he enters the forest, but darkness suddenly surrounds him, and he knows that it's shadow magic, so he orders his men to focus on sound to defend themselves. But Fam instantly takes them out, and Thomas realizes that he has erased all traces of himself, but he still manages to block his attacks. He predicts Fam's movements and manages to cut him, but he realizes that Kurin has already escaped, so he orders his men to retreat. Kurin returns to his camp and tells his men that the enemy soldiers left Stott's castle to attack them, so he thinks it's their chance to capture it. Fam notes that his job is done, and he prepares to return to Ars so that he can receive his payment. But Kurin gives Fam bags of gold as a reward for saving him and offers to give him a position in his army. But Fam notes that he doesn't need a reward from him because he isn't his employer, telling him he'll ask Ars to pay him a ridiculous amount. He leaves with his men, and Kurin can't believe he got rejected, telling his messenger to thank Ars for saving his life and warn him that Fam will ask for a massive reward. Fam returns to Ars, who thanks him for completing the task, but he realizes that Fam is injured, so he asks him if he's okay. He notes that Shadow is a mercenary group full of wanderers and criminals, and they even murder innocent people for money, so he asks Ars if he's afraid of them. But he explains that he isn't, telling them he's glad that he can always count on them because they've led his army to victory in the past battles. But he knows that they're asking for a massive reward, so he starts negotiating with Fam. But he suddenly starts laughing as he realizes that Ars is nothing like his previous clients because he treats them as humans. He tells Ars to just accept him as his vassal as a reward, telling him he wants Shadow to work directly for him because he might become the most powerful person in the Empire. He accepts Fam as his vassal, so Fam swears loyalty to him, and Ars is glad to have him on his side. Meanwhile at Stott's castle, the soldiers discuss how they failed to kill Kurin, but they still think they'll win the battle because their enemies are low on supplies. They see a strange boy, and they start mocking him as one of them tries to take his spear, but he realizes that it's extremely heavy. The boy tells him to stop, and he easily lifts the spear, telling him it isn't a weapon for weaklings. Ars and his vassals head to Stott's castle, and we learn that they plan to capture it with Kurin's army, which is composed of 50,000 soldiers. The strategy is to have them attack the south gate so that Kans will send his forces to defend it, while Ars lays siege from the north with his army of 5,000 men. We see the soldiers at the north gate preparing for battle, and they're confident that they'll win because Ars only has a small army. But Charlotte charges in with Reitz, and she summons a powerful fireball, which blows a massive hole into the gate, so the soldiers freak out. Ars orders his men to charge, telling Reitz and Miriel to lead them, while Clamant opens the south gate from the inside, so that Kurin's forces can join them. Reitz and Miriel break into the castle, and they easily overwhelm the enemy soldiers, so their captain surrenders, and Reitz tells him he made the right choice. But the strange boy suddenly appears, and he mentions that he wants to fight, revealing that his name is Bram. The captain tries to stop him, but Bram knocks him out, and mentions that he is the strongest boy in the castle. He easily defeats a group of soldiers, and challenges Reitz to fight him, so he tells Bram to bring it on. Reitz dodges his attack, and Bram is glad that he has finally found his match, but Reitz tells him their fight is boring because he's relying on his brute strength and intuition. He becomes upset hearing this and charges at Reitz, who easily knocks him down as he starts giving him tips on how to fight. Ars sees them fighting, but Reitz tells Bram not to give up, and Ars wonders why he's giving their enemy a lesson. He checks Bram's stats and realizes that his intellect is extremely low, but he has the potential to surpass Reitz as a fighter. He notes that a true warrior never stops training to improve, and tells Bram to give up on being a soldier if he'll just rely on his strength. But Reitz realizes that Ars heard everything, so he's embarrassed, but Bram starts calling him his master, and he begs Reitz to accept him as his disciple. He wonders why he should accept Bram as his disciple, reminding him that they're enemies, but Ars tells him to join their side, because he thinks Reitz can bring out his full potential. Bram doesn't recognize Ars, so Reitz explains that he's the lord he serves, and Bram thinks he's stronger than Reitz, so he also recognizes him as his master. Reitz realizes that he doesn't have a choice, so he accepts Bram as his disciple, and Miriel notes that she finds him interesting. But the enemy soldiers recognize her as the torturing demon who has crippled countless men, so they beg her to have mercy on them. Clamant's team opens the south gate, and Kurin's army captures the castle, but we learn that Kans was able to escape. The war reaches its final stage, and Kurin praises Ars for his actions, telling everyone he was the key to conquering Stot's castle. He visits Kurin in his room, but he wonders why the guards are staring at him, and Kurin tells him not to worry, telling him he has accomplished so much at such a young age. He wonders if Ars is hiding anything, because he has exceptional wisdom, and even has the power to discover people's talents. He realizes that Kurin isn't acting like his usual self, but he just tells him he's an ordinary lord, and notes that his goal is to make a world where people can live peaceful lives. He adds that he doesn't know why he has powers, but he'll use them for the sake of his people, and Kurin trusts him, revealing that he had to question him because his vassals saw him as a threat. But he explains that he never believed them, telling Ars it's normal for him to be noticed, because he's starting to stand out in Messian. After that, Ars realizes that he needs to be careful, because there are people who don't like him. But he suddenly gets hit by a snowball, and Charlotte reveals that it's her first time seeing snow, so she wants to play around. Reitz finds her ridiculous, but she hits him with snowballs, and he tells Graham they need to counterattack. Everyone starts playing around, while Fam tells everyone to place their bets, asking them if they think Reitz or Charlotte's team will win the fight. Clement isn't interested in joining them, but Marielle challenges him to a drinking contest, and he decides to take her on. Rizal makes a giant snowman, but Reitz crashes into it, and Rizal starts crying. So Reitz tells everyone to help him rebuild the snowman, and Rizal is happy that it's even bigger than before, but the soldiers who placed their bets are angry because nobody won the fight. They tell Fam to give them their money back, but he uses his shadow magic to escape, and Charlotte mentions that she wants to enjoy winter with everyone next year. We see Thomas as he realizes that Marielle was able to see through his plans, and he starts to doubt himself, but Vass suddenly appears, telling him he isn't acting like his usual self. In a flashback, we see Thomas playing chess with Marielle, and their father Edward Grandone realizes that they're both brilliant strategists. But Marielle defeats Thomas, and we learn that she's better than him in every way, so he tries to do his best to surpass her, but he can't beat her since she's a genius. She becomes the Duke's advisor, but he doesn't give up on his dream to defeat her, and one day, she gets banished by the Duke, who appoints Thomas to take her place. So he thinks he finally won against her, by staying loyal to the Duke like his father. We return to the present, as Vass tells Thomas that Kurin's army will arrive in Belzud soon, so he wants to check on him before the next battle. He knows that Marielle is on Kurin's side, thinking it's the reason why they have the advantage, but he notes that he doesn't blame Thomas for the setbacks, since he's as loyal as his father. Vass notes that he's just like Thomas, because he also wants to protect his father's legacy by defeating Kurin, and he tells Thomas he's counting on him. We see Kurin discussing the situation with the others, but a soldier suddenly interrupts them, telling them a messenger has arrived from Belzud. The messenger reveals that Kans sent him, and he proposes a truce, but Kurin is against it, thinking Kans just wants a truce because he is losing the war. But the messenger explains that Kurin's side will suffer casualties if they don't agree to it, and he notes that the mages in Belzud developed a superweapon, which can instantly destroy a city. The messenger explains that they aren't using it, because they don't want people to suffer, but he warns Kurin that they'll activate it if he doesn't agree to the truce. He tells the messenger to give him time to decide, and he has a meeting with the others, as Marielle tells him it's a bluff. Everyone thinks the superweapon doesn't exist, so he decides to reject the messenger's request, telling his soldier to send him away. Rizal wonders what Thomas is up to, and Marielle mentions that she doesn't know, but he starts asking her about her relationship with Thomas, wondering why they both became tacticians. In another flashback, we see the soldiers arresting Edward, because he has been sentenced to death for treason, and he claims that he's innocent, but their leader tells him they have witnesses. He notes that the Grandone family will be stripped of their nobility, and tells Edward that the decision is final. But he mentions that he has a final request, telling them to promote his kids, or kill them if it's not possible, because their talents make them dangerous. He explains that if they're stripped of their nobility, they might serve another duke, and become a threat to Messian. But the soldiers arrest him, and Thomas thinks he's innocent, because he's so loyal that he can't possibly betray the Duke. But Marielle doesn't seem to care, so he tells her they might get executed, but she thinks the Duke won't listen to Edward, because he never listened to his pleas. Muriel and Thomas are demoted to commoners, but she's just glad that they're still alive, and she thinks Edward is an idiot because he didn't do anything to escape his execution. Thomas is upset hearing this, but she tells him everything will be okay because they can still use their minds and voices to survive. Back in the present, Muriel reveals that she entered a military school with Thomas to survive, and they both became tacticians, but he always hated her since she's better than him. We see Thomas as he prepares to leave Belzad Castle, and Cans warns him that it's dangerous because he won't receive reinforcements. But he explains that he's just being loyal to Vass, and he leaves with his men, thinking he needs to defeat Muriel this time. Kurin receives a report that the superweapon has been spotted on the hills of Belzad, so everyone starts to panic, but Muriel thinks it's fake, and Ars sends the Shadows to investigate it. Fam reaches the weapon, and he checks it out, realizing it's fake, because it has no magic water channel. Ars tells everyone about Fam's findings, but Rizal wonders why Thomas is using a fake weapon to deceive them, and Ars notes that the situation is familiar. He notes that it reminds him of the mock battle, where Muriel had her soldiers surrender to release false information, which lured Reitz into attacking. Ars thinks Thomas is using the same tactic, and Muriel agrees with him, so Rizal checks the map, thinking their enemies must be waiting for them in the forest. Kurin orders his men to set off and burn the enemies along with the forest, while Muriel is confident that she'll defeat Thomas again. We see Thomas in the forest, but we learn that his army is one step ahead, because they're waiting for Kurin's forces to attack them. His men place explosives throughout the forest, and they mention that everything's ready, but he tells them about his real plan. He explains that they're vastly outnumbered, and even the explosions can't wipe out their enemies, so he orders his men to attack them while their explosives are going off. He notes that it's the only way to achieve victory, but he admits that it's extremely dangerous, so he tells them to leave if they don't want to follow his plan. He recalls the moment he told Vass about his father, but Vass notes that he believes Edward is innocent and thinks the Duke made a mistake by executing him because they lost a valuable talent. He swears loyalty to Vass, and he's willing to do anything to help him achieve victory, even if it means sacrificing innocent people. We return to the present, as Thomas notes that he'll go alone if his men leave him behind, but he realizes that they all decided to stay because they're all loyal to him. He knows that most of them won't make it back alive, but their resolve makes them a force to be reckoned with, so he's proud to have them by his side. Kurin's forces gather outside the forest, and he thinks it would be a shame to kill Thomas because he's a capable strategist. The mage is prepared to use fire magic, but Rizal can sense that something's wrong, so he stops Kurin before he gives the order to attack. Thomas and his men wonder why Kurin isn't attacking the forest yet, and a fireball almost hits them, so they start to panic. They suddenly get attacked by archers, so they charge in, but Braham arrives with the others, and they clash with Thomas's army. He wonders how they were able to figure out his plan, and he sees Kurin on the battlefield, thinking he can still secure victory by taking him out. Ars checks his stats, and realizes that he has incredible talent, but he's confident that Kurin can defeat him. Thomas charges in with his men, and he cuts through the soldiers, as Ars realizes that Kurin might struggle against him, because he seems to be fired up. Kurin prepares to fight, but Ars rushes forward, and Thomas is about to take him out, but Reitz protects him. He tells Thomas he won't let him touch Ars, and he uses a special maneuver to knock him down, as the soldiers try to capture him, but he manages to break free. He refuses to give up, but he sees Muriel, who starts talking to him. His army surrenders, and Reitz wonders why Ars charged in, so he explains that his body just acted on its own, even though he knew he can't defeat Thomas. Muriel starts mocking Thomas, who's angry since he lost to her again, but she explains that she couldn't see through his plan, and it was Rizal who saved their army. Thomas wonders how he found out about his plan, because Rizal doesn't know anything about him, so he shouldn't be able to read his thoughts. He explains that he thought about how Thomas might defeat them, and considered that he may have already come up with the perfect counter, because he knows how Muriel formulates strategies. She calls him an idiot, but Ars uses his appraisal skill, and realizes that she's used to concealing her feelings. So he tells her to express herself properly, and she admits that she lost this time, but Rizal made up for her mistake. She tells Thomas he's a capable strategist, and he's happy to hear this, realizing that he always wanted her to recognize his talents. He finally admits defeat, and Kurin asks him to join his side, but he explains that he swore loyalty to Vass, so he will never betray him. Kurin orders his men to send him to prison, and he praises resolve for countering his strategy, telling him not to let Miriel lead him astray. After that, Belzad Castle surrenders, and Kurin praises everyone for their efforts, telling them that they now control 2 of the 3 major cities. He notes that it's time to appoint new chiefs for Belzad and Samek, and announces that Lumiere will be the chief of Belzad, while Lupa will rule over Samek. But Charlotte wonders who will be appointed as the Canare County chief, and Kurin explains that Lumiere can't govern Canare, because he's now the chief of Belzad. So Ars will take over as the Canare County chief, which makes him lose it, because he thinks he isn't fit for the position. He prepares to accept, but a group of nobles blocks his path, telling Kurin he's too young to be the county chief. But the other nobles think he deserves the position, because he's an excellent leader, and they tell everyone about his achievements. His vassals think he's perfect for the role, and he accepts the position, so everyone celebrates. After that, Ars talks to Lumiere, who reveals that he isn't happy with his promotion because he needs to leave Canare. He knows that Belzad is superior to Canare, but he has grown attached to his hometown, so he doesn't want to leave it behind. But he's glad that Ars has been appointed as its new chief, because he's a capable leader, and Lumiere tells him to make Canare a better place, so he promises to do his best. Ars returns to Lamberg, and everyone welcomes him back, but he sees a family crying because their son died during the war. They thank him for sending them a letter about their son's bravery, and they tell him not to cry, because everyone's celebrating. Leisha is happy to see him, and she rushes to his side, telling him she missed him. His family welcomes him back, but everyone suddenly starts leaving, so he wonders what's happening. The maids take him away, and his vassals hear the church bell ringing, so they realize that he's about to get married. Everyone attends the event, but Ars is still confused, so Hammond reveals that they've arranged everything for his wedding. Leisha appears in her wedding dress, and Ars thinks she looks amazing, while the toy merchant uses his ship to release petals. They begin the ceremony, and everyone's happy for Ars, who realizes that people suffered during the war. But he knows that he must protect them and create a world where they can live in peace, so he tells Leisha he'll do his best, and she promises to be with him every step of the way. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.